So I'm going to call to order the Delta Protection Commission meeting for Thursday, January 19, 2017. So with that, could we stand for the salute to the flag? And Oscar, would you lead us, please? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Jeannie, if you could call the roll.
Chair Thompson.
Here.
Vice Chair Villegas.
Here.
Commissioner Burgess.
Here.
Commissioner Ferguson.
Here.
Commissioner Nomalini.
Here.
Commissioner Wynn.
Here.
Commissioner Ferrara.
Here.
Commissioner Ledesma.
Here.
And Commissioner White.
Here.
Okay, very fine. And before the public comes to the podium, I would like to welcome Diane Burgess, a newly elected supervisor from Contra Costa County. Welcome again, I guess. Any comments or?
I just want to say thank you. I was wanting to be here. That's a large reason why I ran for county supervisor. I know you will all miss Mary Pifo. She encouraged me to run for this seat because she thought that I could step up and try to fill
Very
this.
fine.
So thank you for the welcome.
You're quite welcome. Okay, we're now at the public comment period.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Before you go to that, the clerk would like to call a couple of additional roll for the roll call.
Certainly.
Susan Loftus. Here. And Josh Eddy. Here.
Okay, perfect.
And we do have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. I'm new at this, so it'll take me a couple meetings.
Yeah, right.
So, to item number 3, public comment. We have 2 cards. If you wish to speak to the commission, fill out a card and give it to our clerk, please. First speaker, Russell Van Lobensels.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Russ Van Lobensels, and tonight I'm addressing you on behalf of the Delta Caucus, which is an organization of the 5 Delta County Farm Bureaus. That portion of each farm bureau that's in the Delta has come together to form this group called the Delta Caucus. I'd like to briefly raise some major concerns that we have concerning the DPC levy financing feasibility strategy or study, which is coming close to its final round. The study identifies 3 potential fees for further investigation. Water conveyance fee, which would apply to exported water. Delta water users fees, which would be applied to those of us in the Delta who use water, pumping from the channels. And the third is a Delta flood prevention fee, which would be applied to those that convey water through the Delta. And it would apply to upstream people who have water coming from their property through the Delta, as well as Delta landowners who pump water from their islands into the Delta channels. As I said, Delta landowners would be subject to 2 of those, the in-Delta water user fee and the Delta flood prevention fee, in addition to the reclamation district fees that they're paying today. Delta landowners built the levees, own and pay taxes on the property that the levees are on, and for the last 100 years have paid to maintain those levees. We are the only direct beneficiary that has done that. And we believe that they should not be subject, Delta landowners should not be subject to additional fees to use facilities that they themselves created. The focus of the study, from our perspective, should be to identify and develop tools to assess those who benefit from Delta levies but pay no cost of the maintenance in order to expand the financial revenue base. I think you need to, as you come closer and closer to adopting this study, I think you need to fully consider the content of the study, how it's going to be used, its accuracy, and understand that it will be the foundation for any new system to finance Delta levy maintenance. And if the foundation is wrong, the final result will be wrong. I appreciate that the time limit for comment on this study has been extended, and I also appreciate that staff will be meeting with us in the next couple weeks, and hopefully we can sort of massage this study and get it to the point that it can be a good study that can go forward and provide some better financing for levee maintenance. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for the benefit of the audience, the subcommittee that's been dealing with this feasibility assessment study is going to be holding another meeting on the 16th of February. Time and location?
10:30 a.m. at the State Resources Agency building.
And just for the information of the audience, the subcommittee is comprised of myself, Justin Lobensells, and Kate White. So I can speak for myself. I've certainly heard from a number of folks in the Delta who are concerned about this study, and I certainly understand why they're concerned. So we'll take that up, we'll listen, and we'll work as hard as we can to make sure that the issues that are of concern to you are addressed. With that, Melinda Terry.
Yes, thank you. I'm the Executive Director of the California Central Valley Flood Control Association, and following up on the comments of the Farm Bureau, yeah, I think we're in agreement that there's just a need for some more discussion of the feasibility and what's been proposed so far, but we do really appreciate, since it wasn't on the agenda, I just want to make sure to appreciate that at least the public comment period was extended, and that there's, you know, an opportunity to have some additional meetings, and hopefully the commission itself will make some time for itself at its meetings to, you know, discuss as a whole and hopefully look at some revisions based on those public comments. I'm also the one, because related to this, as the Russell mentioned, there's fees being proposed for further evaluation and an implementation study in the DPC study. But the Central Valley Flood Plan is in their 2017 update. What they're really focusing on is financing mechanisms as well. And so they have fees. So I was the one who had requested, and thank you for putting on the agenda. I think it's agenda item 9. DWR is here to talk about that plan, and I know Mike Mierzwa is going to cover those fees so that you can see what other folks are proposing on those same lands. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else that has something to share with the commission that's not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move to item number 4, the consent agenda, and that's approval of the minutes of November 17th, 2016. Is there a motion? We have a motion by Farrar. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Loftus. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously.
Mr. Chair, I
Yes.
abstained because I wasn't.
Supervisor Wynn?
Abstained because I wasn't.
Okay, one abstention.
I abstained since I was there also.
I know. It's up to you. I know, and then I'm abstained, so it just,
Okay, let's try this again.
that's why I wasn't going to, I
I
wasn't gonna
wasn't
say
going to
anything
either.
to support it, because I was afraid that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just to be clear, commission members can vote to approve the minutes even if they were not present at the meeting.
But they don't have to if they
Yeah,
feel.
if they prefer to abstain, that's
Okay.
fine too. But they don't have to have been
So it was
present at the meeting to
unanimous
vote.
except the 10 that said no. Do you have the 3 that,
There's 3 that are
Yeah.
abstaining.
Burgess, Villegas, and Wynn?
Villegas and-
Okay?
Got it.
Very good. The rest of us are okay?
Okay.
Okay, we're moving on then. Okay, Erik Vink received the Executive Director's report.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome audience, commission members and members of the audience. Just want to hit a few high points in the written report, which is in the commissioner packets and are always available on our website for members of the audience who would like to see these either before or after the meetings. Chair Thompson did mention that the subcommittee on the levy financing feasibility study would be meeting on February 16th at 10:30 a.m. We do have that agenda posted on our commission website. And by the way, the commission website is we have a new commission website format we're really tickled with. We're still working out some little bugs with it, but it gives us much greater functionality with the information that we present. And so if you have not visited us recently at delta.ca.gov, take a look. We'll continue to make improvements to that. But we have posted the agenda for the February 16th meeting on our website. And as this is a publicly noticed meeting, more than just our 3 subcommittee members can attend. We've had regular participation from Commissioner Ferrara, which we greatly appreciate. But if this topic is of interest to any of you, you're welcome to attend those meetings as well. And of course, the members of the audience who have a particular interest in that issue will want to attend. A few meetings ago, we had a very useful presentation. I know it raised some concerns amongst a number of commission members. A presentation regarding harmful algal blooms in the Delta. And in response to a request that Vice Chair Villegas made at that September commission meeting, the commission staff has looked into potential actions that can assist in addressing the problem. And I think what we've settled on that could be most helpful, we're obviously not going to be able to get out there and stop these harmful algal blooms from occurring, although maybe in a year like this they will be of much less severity. But we can do something to help publicize and notify people of their existence. And so there's more information in my staff report, but I wanted to let you know that we did take that up, looked into it, came up with a handful of ideas, some of which were quite expansive and were clearly beyond our capabilities and means. But I think I've settled on a good one so that we can be doing something to address that critical issue. A very light month for land use comments. Moving on to the administrative update, the governor's proposed fiscal year 17-18 state budget was a stable one for the commission. We did, however, receive a proposed supplement in the governor's budget of funding from the Environmental License Plate Fund. That's one of our 2 special funds that provide the commission's operating budget for us to be able to hire a program manager to work on Delta Plan implementation. This will also help provide better support for our commission chair, who sits as a member of the Delta Stewardship Council. And so we're hopeful that that will make it through the budget process. We're excited about the request being included within the governor's proposed budget. In the final page of my executive director report is an update on where we are with our current fiscal year. I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding that. And then finally, I just wanted to wrap up by saying that we have had some staff changes at the commission since the last meeting in November. Both Nicole Burt, who was our information officer and our lead on so many important things, took a promotional opportunity with another state agency. We're really sorry to see her go, but we've managed to hold on to just a little bit of her because she is a newly named board member for the Delta Regional Foundation, who's our partner on the Delta Leadership Program. And so we'll continue to have her involved with the Regional Foundation. And then we also bid farewell to Jennifer Ruffalo, who was our program manager that was leading the levy financing feasibility study, but also was helping to advance our land use plan update and a few other important efforts. And she went to the California Water Commission to help give them out to help them disperse about $2 billion of funding for water storage in California. So our loss is the Water Commission's gain. We're actively searching for replacements for both of those 2 staff members. They're critical positions for us, and I hope by the time our commission next meets, we'll be able to introduce you to the newest members of our staff. So that concludes my executive director report. There are some upcoming Delta events that are included in the report as well. I won't go through them all, but for those interested in getting out and about in the Delta, there's always plenty going on. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll take any questions or clarifications.
Thank you, Eric. Any questions for Eric? Okay, seeing none. Moving on to item 6, we'll receive a Delta Protection Advisory Committee report. Mark Pruner.
Now, while Mark's making his way to that microphone, by the way, the microphone is recording for our tape. It's not amplifying, so apologies. It is there for a purpose, but it's just not amplifying voices. So,
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a short report to tell you what we're up to. We convened on January 12. Can you all hear me okay? I'm used to hearing the speaker. We talked about our work plan in 2017 and look forward to working on the economic sustainability plan and some other upcoming document reviews that are coming forward. The committee also expressed some interest in tackling what we see as a central, somewhat thorny issue that cuts across a lot of subject matters, and that is Delta as place, and really trying to flesh out in advisory capacity for the Commission what it means in the statute when it says, for example, in Water Code Section 85054, that the water conveyance and the ecological purposes set out in statute are to be done, but must be done respecting Delta's place, looking at agriculture, recreation, et cetera, in the list that's there in the statute. So our hope is to come throughout the year with ideas and some concrete proposals to help to fill in some of the blanks that we see that exist in the regulatory and in the implementation of the statute. I also want to report that we're talking with Congressman Garamendi's office. The Congressman has indicated a desire to come and brief the Delta Protection Advisory Committee on the new federal legislation that was enacted December 19 and signed into law, one of the most important federal statutes that's come along in the last 25 years or so. And certainly when that's set, I anticipate the members of the Commission certainly would be invited to that as well. And that concludes my report. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to entertain those.
Okay, Mark. Are there any questions of Mark?
Thank you.
Good stuff.
Okay, Mark, thank you. Moving on to item number 7, the annual report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We distributed with the Commission member packets a proposed 2016 annual report. The version that we have posted online has a draft watermark. This went to the printer before we added the draft watermark, so please do understand this is a draft report. It's subject to any changes that you all request this evening. We do have a statutory requirement to provide an annual report to the governor and legislature on the progress made in achieving the statutory objectives of the Commission. And this is the staff's recommended version of the 2016 annual report. We would be looking for direction from Commission members on whether to adopt this as is, or if there are Commission members that would like additional time to review it and maybe set a deadline perhaps in the next 10 days or so for comments to come back to us. We would feel comfortable making typographical type changes and editing type changes. If it's something more of a substantive nature, I think that would be appropriate for the Commission to take up in discussion right now. But with the Commission's approval, we will finalize this report and distribute it to the governor and legislature, and we always post it on our website and make the availability of it known to the public who follows our activities.
Any comments on the annual report? I would just like to say that, the photograph on the front of it is, I guess, the reason why a lot of us take the Commission charge very seriously. I mean, it really shows what the Delta's about, and I think more people should come down and visit it. So, Are we good with it, or do we need additional time to approve it? We're good?
We're good.
Okay, Eric, thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, could we have a motion and a vote to document the approval of the annual report?
I'll move the recommended action.
I'll second that.
Motion by Ledesma, second by Burgess. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Are we sure? Unanimous. All right. Okay. Eric, next agenda item is the approval of Delta Leadership Program 2017 participants.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, as commission members recall, in 2016, we inaugurated a Delta Leadership Program, a joint effort with the Delta Regional Foundation to take a group of emerging Delta leaders and provide a deeper background into important policy issues that impact the Delta region, and to do some work also on developing personal leadership skills to help people be better representatives of their community or their volunteer organization or their occupation, whatever it was that brought them to our Delta Leadership Program. And we graduated 20 members in that 2016 program, including some people sitting at the table, our commission clerk being one, commission members, Supervisor Wynn, Commissioner Wynn from San Joaquin County, and also we had another commission member, Commissioner Van Lobensel's. See, he's not here. I don't see his face. I don't get jogged into memory. We had members of our Delta Protection Advisory Committee that participated, Barbara Daly among them. Great effort, a really great experience. We're looking to kick off the program again in 2017. We have opened up an application process. I was appreciative of the participation of Supervisor Wynn, Commission Member Wynn, and our Chair, Commissioner Thompson, in helping evaluate the applicants. And based on that evaluation, recommended 15 participants in this year's Delta Leadership Program. We had a 16th who asked to have his nomination withdrawn this week because of health concerns, and we wish him well. But the 15 members are included in the commissioner packet with a little bit of information about each of them. I'm really pleased to say that they very much span the breadth of the Delta, both by occupation, geography, background, in every possible way. I think it's a really good, diverse group of people. We plan to kick off the leadership program with a seminar in Sacramento next Friday, focusing on the state policy process and the state's Delta agencies. And then in the successive 4 months, we'll move those seminars throughout the Delta region and touch on topics ranging from agriculture and water to public safety, the environment, recreation, the Delta economy. A really good effort. It's a great partnership with the Delta Regional Foundation, and I've recently actually joined their board as well, representing the commission. So we look forward to this partnership. We receive support from entities throughout the Delta to help offset the out-of-pocket costs for this activity. The commission staffing, including our strategic plan consultant, Lisa Butler, if you remember working with her. Lisa's actively involved with us in staffing the leadership program as well. So that's how we run it, that's how we fund it, and my request this evening is for approval of these 15 participants in the 2017 program.
Good.
Did you receive any applications from Contra Costa? Because I don't see any.
Yeah, I appreciate you brought that
I
up.
didn't see any announcement
Commissioner
of
Burgess.
it, so
Yeah,
I'm
I know.
just curious if there's a
we,
way of.
we tried, and we did a little bit of recruitment, and we were a little bit foiled in that effort. So we'll have to redouble our efforts in 2018.
Okay.
But you're right, we're not in every corner of the Delta. We are, missing some parts of the Delta in our geographic representation.
I felt the same way about Solano, but we'll
And
try again next year.
We'll do better on that next year. We had some great candidates, and people either moved on, or they were unavailable, or they just couldn't get their arm twisted into agreeing to take the time. So we'll keep working on that.
Okay, is there a motion?
I so move.
A motion by White. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Eddie. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous. Thank you very much.
And Mr. Chair, if I could add one thing.
Yes.
Following the first seminar next Friday, and by the way, Chair Thompson will be welcoming the participants on Friday morning, and we appreciate that. But following the first seminar, we will be having a reception at Chops Restaurant, which is right across from the state capitol. The reception will be from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. We're not going to make anyone write any checks. It's a purely we're not looking for contributions of any kind. But we would love commission members to show up and meet the Delta Leadership Program participants.
When is that?
It's Friday, January 27th, from 4:30 to 6:30. An invitation went out this week. I also will mention that, as with last year, when we conclude the program in May, we will bring the participants together before our May commission meeting, which will be in Ileton in May of 2017, and that will be an opportunity for you as well if you're more remote from Sacramento and can't make it into town on a Friday evening. For those of you who can make it, we'd love to see you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on this item? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 9, and this is the 2017 updated Central Valley Flood Protection Plan and the draft supplemental program environmental impact report. And I believe Natasha, yes.
Hello, Chair Thompson and other commissioners. I'm your acting assistant executive director, and it's been my privilege to do that for the last 6 months. I also had the privilege of working with everybody who's going to be speaking with you today. First up is Lizzie.
And why don't you introduce yourself to those that may not know who you are, other than acting?
Yes. Well, I first started work in California in 2001 with the Energy Commission as a wildlife biologist, and moved up to a supervisory position there. And then I took a small break and went to Livermore and worked on your national security with Lawrence Livermore National Labs. I was then offered an opportunity at Department of Water Resources, and you'll be hearing a little bit about what is called the conservation strategy. And I was in an office that wrote that document and helped with the public outreach on that. And then I worked part-time for the Central Valley Flood Protection Board, I think for 9 months, helping with their biological resources work. And then I was offered a limited term position to do some training and development while some of the commission staff's on medical leave.
Very fine.
So it's been a great training and development for me, for
So
sure.
our own Natasha Nelson.
Yes.
Okay, welcome. Okay,
So your first speaker is Leslie Gallagher. She's had been acting as the executive officer for Central Valley Flood Protection Board since July 2014, but she was appointed in September 2015. And I was in the audience that day, and I was really proud of her. She is the first woman and the first non-engineer to occupy that position in the board's 104-year history. Prior to this position, she was at the San Diego County Water Authority and the City of Oceanside. She's also been active in the State Bar of California in the Public Law and Executive Committee. Mike Mierzwa, who is the second speaker tonight, is with the Department of Water Resources. You'll know him as the lead flood planner. He works in the flood planning office and has been highly involved in the engineering and outreach work that underlies the update. He's really worn a lot of hats and is kind of a go-to person. I know personally he's answered a lot of questions I've had. He's working closely with Mary Jimenez, who is here today as well in the audience. She's a supervising engineer at DWR. She's really leading the staff that's putting pen to paper and typing late into the night to make sure that all of the plan is updated for this 2017 update and many of the supporting documents. Mary's also notable because she's the appointed staff on an Army Corps of Engineer program known as Silver Jackets, which DWR joined in 2013. The program allows multiple agencies to jointly apply resources to reduce flood risk. Andrea Buckley will be speaking after DWR. She's been acting as the Environmental Program Branch Chief since July 2016. She was permanently appointed to this position in October 2016. Her desk is always full of permit applications that she needs to work on, but also she's been highly involved in all of the planning work and making sure that the board can adopt this plan in June 2017. I believe we'll start with Leslie and a video.
Thank you. That was quite an introduction. I appreciate that. I didn't think you could ever be the first woman anything at this day and age. Apparently it's still possible. So thank you for that, Natasha. I do want to point out also that we have one of our esteemed board members who's trying to hide behind his ball cap. Clyde McDonald from the Flood Board is also here, monitoring us, keeping us all in line. So I really do appreciate you inviting us here today to talk about our flood plan. This is the 2017 update to the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. And this first update refines the near and long-term investment needs established in the 2012 plan and includes recommendations on policies and funding to support comprehensive flood risk management actions throughout the system. I'm sure you all know, maybe for the benefit of some of the newer members, that some of the state plan of flood control is within the Delta, but the majority of the system lies outside of the Delta. Mike and Andrea will be giving you some high-level details about the contents and adoption schedule for this plan, but I wanted to just set the stage for how the plan and implementation have improved the system. On the subject of comprehensive flood risk management, the approach taken by the state over the past decade has been supported by the passage of several bond measures, most notably Propositions 84 and Proposition 1E. Here's an example of what California has purchased for that investment. Last week saw significant rainfall throughout the valley, combined with astronomical high tides in the Delta. Flood warnings at one point were in effect in 24 counties, flood flash warnings in 14 counties. The Flood Operations Center was in effect 24-hour operations, and day and night patrols were along the MA9 section in the pocket area. For the first time in 10 years, DWR opened the gates on the Sacramento Weir. They opened a total of 35 of the 48 gates to maintain stage in the Sacramento River at the I Street Bridge below 30 feet. This week, all but 3 of the 19 flood control reservoirs in Northern and Central Valley are making flood control releases. And at one point, Folsom was making 60,000 CFS cubic feet per second releases out of Folsom into the American River. And the state plan of flood control levees have held. We have had no major breaches and no lives lost. This was a significant event. This is a testament to the wisdom and the prudent investments the state has made in this most important infrastructure. It also showcases the incredible amount of coordination between federal, state, local agencies. So many moving parts had to be synthesized to make sure that this system held. And I have a little video I want to show you. This is pretty dramatic, showing opening of the Sacramento Weir. This was shot mostly from an OES drone. It's been a while. That was taken because this was really an event. Like, this doesn't happen very often. The last time they opened these gates was 10 years ago. And yes, they have to be opened manually. This is early 20th century technology at work. This is a 100-year-old facility, so we lower a person down on a wire and pull these pins,
Oh, wow.
and you'll see this one pop open, and then they just kind of float along in the Sacramento bypass. So this is the river you see in the background, the Sacramento River. This is the Sacramento Weir, and this goes into the Sacramento bypass, which joins the Yolo bypass that I'm sure you're all familiar with. We've got some dramatic music going along too. But, there's a shot coming up here. I want you to pay attention to the middle gates are open, and you'll be able to see the gates on the side that are closed. There really is a significant difference with the volume of water that can pass through this facility when the pins are open and closed. And that's a pretty, I mean, that's a significant volume of water going through there that you can see. This shot coming up in just a minute, you can see in the background kind of the long shot where it's coming out, and then it goes into the Yolo bypass, which at this point someone described to me today looks like Lake Michigan. I don't know if anybody's driven over it recently, but there's a lot of water in there.
This is so cool.
Yeah, pretty impressive.
I don't care what we say about Yolo County, they're okay.
That's right. They do okay.
So we had a lot of interest in the opening of the Weir. There were media that camped out all night long. They did the first gate openings at 4 in the morning. And not to avoid, any viewing, but because that's when the stage level at I Street was projected to get to 30 feet. You can probably stop it, that's good. Yeah, so there's YOLO in the background. So you can see, with all that water, surviving this event really was a major accomplishment. But as we've outlined in the plan and what Mike and Andrea are going to tell you, there's still a lot of work to be done. Significant additional investment in operations and maintenance of the existing system, as well as capital improvements, are still needed. And many areas of the system still have an unacceptably high risk of failure. The Central Valley Flood Protection Board and DWR are committed to buying down that risk with a reasoned, measured, system-wide investment approach refined over the past 5 years by extensive outreach to the regional flood management groups and other stakeholders, as I hope Dante can attest to. He's been part of one of those regional groups. And we welcome and invite your participation as well. So I am going to turn it over to Mike at this point, who has some slides. These are the slides that he's also shown to the coordinating committee and to the flood board, so you're getting the same presentation that these other boards have heard.
Quick question, Natasha.
Yeah.
Did you, to close the gates, do you just pull them in, or do you have to put a human down there to put it back?
Yeah, there's no automated anything. So they pull the pins, the gates fly out, they float away, the farmers call, say, I have your gate.
Oh.
DWR goes around in a truck, picks them all up, and then manually repositions them again.
So they don't stay like they were in the picture?
So some of them do, but some of them don't, yeah. Mike may know a little better about how that goes. But
Thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah, they're
Well,
tethered.
excuse me, while Mike's making his way to the microphone, there are copies of this presentation that he'll make in front of all the commission members. I don't know that we have many copies for the members of the public, but it is posted on our website.
And I'm talking to the Yolo County Supervisor over here, and he says that he and his colleague from Sacramento County run down there and get those gates and bring them back.
Not really.
Above and beyond the call of duty. But Eric, is there any chance we can get a microphone to the podium?
Actually, there's a cordless mic there. Will that work?
I don't know.
Right where
I'm getting
Commissioner
old, I
Burgess
guess. I
is?
can't hear very well.
Is that okay if we use that one? Great. So if
Thank you.
commissioners need to speak, if they can share that microphone that's in front of Commissioner Nomalini there.
There's a couple here.
Good evening, Mr. Chair,
Welcome,
members
Mike.
of the commission. My name is Mike Mierzwa. I'm a civil engineer with the California Department of Water Resources. And as Natasha had indicated, I am the lead flood management planner for the department. It's my privilege to be here this evening to share with you the content of the 2012 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan update. And I will admit a little bit of anxiety having to come in after a very nice visual presentation of the Sacramento Weir and Bypass in operation. Provide a little context. That structure was started in construction back in 1916 by the city of Sacramento. It took the city over a year in construction to complete the structure. It is now part of the process, but it was originally a local project that predates our state plan of flood control facilities, which are traditionally known as the state federal project that protects the majority of the Central Valley from flooding. The Central Valley Flood Protection Plan actually has its genesis before even Propositions 1E and 84. In 2005, the California Department of Water Resources put together a white paper that was titled Flood Warnings Responding to California's Flood Crisis. That document outlines some of the policy recommendations that we should take, as well as the need to define what investments we would make throughout the state plan of flood control facilities to reduce the liability to the state and local agencies due to catastrophic flooding associated with large-scale flood events, similar to those that we saw back in 1986 and 1997. In this graphic here, you can see that in addition to the 2005 white paper, that this is really an update of what will be a continuing and evolving planning process so that over time we can continue to apply the best understanding science to manage floodwaters as they come through the system itself. The Central Valley Flood Protection Plan is a strategic blueprint. It exists at really a programmatic level. It is not a funding decision process. The key item in the 2012 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan was a state system-wide investment approach, which we've abbreviated the SSIA. That speaks to the actions that programs that the state administers can take to reduce those flood risks, as well as the money that is needed for those programs to implement those measures. The Central Valley Flood Protection Plan is updated on a 5-year basis, and it really, with this cycle, added specificity not only to the investments that were addressed and first identified in the 2012 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, but it does reach back into the 2005 white paper and put a stronger focus in on the policy recommendations so that we can have a more effective overall management system. The primary and supporting goals of the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan were outlined by the Central Valley Flood Protection Act of 2007, also known as Senate Bill 5. The primary goal is, of course, to improve flood risk management, and then it had 4 supporting goals, which were also addressed in the 2012 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, as well as this update. Those supporting goals are to improve operations and maintenance, promote ecosystem functions, improve institutional support, and promote multi-benefit projects, which is stretching our dollars beyond just investing in a flood system and into a broader water management system. The 2012 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan system-wide investment approach looked at, by legislation, 3 fundamental approaches before it arrived at the state system-wide investment approach. And I want to spend a little time speaking to those because it gives you a sense for what has changed with this particular update. The graphic you're looking at here, the primary goal is on the bottom axis, moving from left to right, where we're showing from a sort of qualitative perspective that we're improving the ability for the system to manage floodwaters by reducing risk. So as each of these approaches moves further to the right, we're getting more benefit for what we consider traditional flood risk reduction. The axis that's sitting on the left-hand side represents the other 4 supporting goals. And so as we move upwards on this axis, we're showing that we're also addressing those other goals. For those approaches, each of the circles represents a cost estimate for that particular approach to accomplish those primary and supporting goals over a variety of time horizons or time plans. That's the way the 2012 plan was addressed. So I'll talk a little bit about those approaches and address the time frame for each of those because it changes in our 2017 update. First, we were asked to go through and develop an approach where we looked at the existing system and what would it take from a capital improvement and a management perspective to reinvest in that system just to get it back up to the design capacities that were established in a 1953 for the San Joaquin and a 1955 memo from the state to the federal government. And that approach concluded that it would cost $19 to $23 billion, and it would take about 20 years for us to go through what is largely a rule system to literally reestablish what was largely a geometric standard and allow the flows that were outlined back in the 50s to move through the system again. And as you can see, there would be some reductions to flood risk management and some of the supporting goals addressed by that approach, but it wouldn't get everything. We then looked at what would it take for us just to address the Senate Bill 5's 200-year level of urban protection and protect the urban communities within the Central Valley. And that was a much more cost-effective approach where it would take $9 billion to $11 billion to protect the high-risk communities, and it would take us about 10 years to do so. That approach also includes the cost estimates for us to work in partnership with the small communities in the Central Valley so that they may achieve a 100-year level protection or begin to approach that. The last of the approaches we looked at would be if we were to go through and incorporate all of the supporting goals into our analysis. So we're getting ecosystem benefits, some water supply activities through better reservoir management out there. And the end price of this enhanced flood system capacity approach was a scenario that would cost $32 to $41 billion. It would take over 30 years to implement. I believe it was 35 in the 2012 plan. And at that time, we were really in the infancy of trying to grow our programs, even beyond the extent that Propositions 1E and 84 had, so we were a little hesitant to just go straight to that approach. The result was a compromise where we took some of the best features of those three foundational approaches and blended them into this state system-wide investment approach, which had a modest price tag of $14 to $17 billion, and in the 2012 plan was described as having an implementation time frame of 25 years. And we thought that was fairly ambitious as far as implementation. In 2017, we conducted additional technical work, and that includes a conservation strategy, which Natasha had referred to, which looks at the conservation opportunities within our flood system to achieve ecosystem restoration. We conducted an operations, maintenance, repair, rehabilitation, and replacement study, which is a more detailed fiscal study of what actions would we need to maintain the existing system and what money would we need on an annual basis to keep those operations functional so that we would have a high level of service through that system. We went and did 2 basin-wide feasibility studies, one for the Sacramento River Basin and one for the San Joaquin Basin, where we looked at what would be the large-scale project features as well as some regional projects that we could use to move large flood flows around a 100-year or 200-year event safely through our system. And then last, we had commissioned local agencies into 6 regional flood management planning groups. These are what we call RFMPs, and asked them to outline and develop projects that we could include within this update of the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. Based on those 4 foundational efforts, we had a cost escalation because there was more information provided within the plan. And so what you're seeing in this graphic here is the 2017 update has a larger cost bubble, but we achieve more of our primary and secondary goals based off of the interactions with local stakeholders, environmental, non-governmental organizations, ag community, as well as the landowners themselves and other state agencies. And those are really embodied through those 4 foundational reports that accompany the draft plan. The 2017 update is fairly simple in its organization. There are 4 chapters. The first really speaks to the context of the plan itself, and it recognizes the value of going back and reading the 2012 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, so we're not changing any of the commitments that were made in the 2012 plan. It then talks about our engagement approach. It shares perspectives from the stakeholders who we've been interacting with for the past 10 years in the development of this plan series. Chapter 3 gets into really refinements of what it is we hope to do to better reduce the risks as well as achieve the supporting goals of the plan. These are where you see the actions. And then Chapter 4 is really our path towards implementation. It's what can we do collectively to achieve the actions and the results that are outlined in Chapter 3. And so you see the financing is really the first word that leads off in Chapter 4. And it's really the real opportunity, as well as the elephant in the room, is how are we going to address this large-scale program. Chapter 1, as I indicated, really focuses in a little bit of a recap of where we've made progress to date, as well as recapping on the policy issues that have what I would call new mandates that have occurred since 2012. As I had indicated earlier in my presentation, the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan series itself is focused in at a programmatic scale, but there are elements that do get into regional or small-scale actions. The majority of the activities within the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan are what I would consider system-wide or large-scale actions or programs that sit out there, but we do talk about the services that the state provides at a regional, medium scale, or a small scale. So this can be very confusing and very different than other plans where traditionally we think of a plan as a process used to come forth and give a recommendation for an investment in a discrete project. Here we're talking about investment within programs. In Chapter 1, we do discuss that the accomplishments of the past 10 years investments, where we have already expended $2.4 billion, can be grouped within really 5 mega programs, and those are flood management planning, floodplain risk management. I lead both of those efforts for the state, our flood risk reduction projects, our flood system operations and maintenance, and our flood emergency response program. And as you can see here, the majority of the money that has been spent thus far actually has been geared towards the flood risk reduction projects themselves. We also then talk about the policy issues. So this is reaching back to the 2005 white paper. And what I wanted you to walk away from this is, as we had interactions with stakeholders, there were over 30 different themes or policy issues that were coming up. So we did a lumping exercise to consolidate those into what we considered 8 core themes of policy issues. And as the way they're arranged here in this graphic, the first 3 really focus in on technical issues. The next 3 policy issues are focused in on implementation challenges. And the last 2 issues are really focused in on coordination interactions with others. And so I'll talk briefly about those. The first is our land use and floodplain management policy items. The second category is residual risk management. And the third is hydraulic and ecosystem baselines and program phasing. This is where the financing begins to come into the picture. Of the next tier, where we're talking about implementation challenges, we talk about the operations and maintenance of the flood system. We just have a lot of detail in the plan about the development of multi-benefit projects. And then the last of this series is talking about effective governance and institutional support. And then the last 2 categories around coordination, we have a special section that's called out just about the specific actions and recommendations for coordination with federal agencies. And it breaks it up between the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, as well as the resource management agencies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife and NOAA Fisheries, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And then the last category, of course, is finance. It's the coordination on that, and that is our communication to all of the stakeholders, the local, state, and federal levels. In Chapter 2, where we're refining the state system-wide investment approach, we're really talking about the process by which we developed this update for the plan and the perspective of stakeholders. There were really 2 key themes that come out of Chapter 2. We highlight the accomplishments from working with our regional partners, which was a recommendation of the 2012 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. And in that process, we had 6 regional flood management planning groups established, where the state provided some funding to those local agencies that then carried on coordination and activities to identify projects within their basins. And the map you're looking at here, it's bleached, but these areas coincide with the state plan of flood control areas. So for this group, you'll see there's a gap in the delta. It's not really clear in this graphic, but the RFMPs weren't originally chartered to go through and talk about actions on the non-project levies within the delta. However, we did encourage them to go through and still give us the list of projects that weren't within the state plan of flood control. What that means for the context of the plan is, when you'll see the cost estimates later in our presentation here, we backed those cost estimates for non-project levies back out of the plan, but we retained and kept that information within the appendices of the plan, knowing that the knowledge of those future projects could be beneficial to other state investment programs. So literally another program could come through and use the appendices for the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan to get a sense for the level of investment to be made outside of the project system. We then categorized the outcomes that we could get from investing in this flood system. This table represents, at a very high level, what we call societal values, and we have those broadly categorized in 4 categories: public safety outcomes, ecosystem vitality outcomes, economic stability outcomes, and then finally, last category we call enriching experiences. This is a catch-all for everything else. And within the plan, we talk about what are some of the metrics that we can use to track progress made in achieving those outcomes over time. The confusing element is these are different than our supporting goals, but this context allows us to actually bring the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan to be consistent with the California Water Plan updates, as well as the Governor's California Water Action Plan, which talk about the broader societal goals to be achieved for public investments in any water project. And then I do have a footnote here, is in the plan there is a more detailed breakdown where for each of these 4 categories, we have several specific subcategories in the plan that identify more specific metrics that we hope to achieve and the outcomes associated with those, and that's table 2.1 within the plan. I just didn't share it in this PowerPoint here because it's pretty small when you're looking at all of that in a table format. Then the last part of Chapter 2 is around each of the 8 policy items that I articulated earlier. We shared the perspectives from our stakeholders and actually included those within the plan so that the public and other stakeholders could understand what were the key themes that were coming up in our conversations. And in that characterization, we listed areas where we found that there was general agreement amongst all the stakeholders of how you categorize the issue and generally what we should be doing about that issue. And you're seeing that in this small graphic you can't read off on the left-hand side here. And to the right, we talk about where we have areas for continuing dialogue and discussion. And the advantage of Senate Bill 5 and the Central Valley Flood Protection Act is the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan is required to be updated on a 5-year basis. So these are some of the items that we'll be including and focusing our conversations and discussions as we develop the 2022 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. Chapter 3, this is where we begin to actually get into the meat of the plan. This is where many people are interested in seeing what it is we hope to do. And again, there was a little bit of a change from the 2012 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, where now we're giving a broader treatment to the difference between capital investments as well as the need for ongoing maintenance activities. And so this table you're looking at here has divided that left to right. However, for both of those categories, capital investments and ongoing investments, we then talk about 4 areas of interest. The first category are what we call system-wide improvements. And it really is up to the state and the federal government to manage these system-wide improvements because we cut across all of these regional boundaries. And the Yolo Bypass is the flagship example that most of us are familiar with that fits into that category. On an ongoing investment, system-wide action there, you see the state operations, planning, performance tracking, as well as the routine maintenance of the system fits into that same category. So for every category, there is a capital improvement as well as ongoing improvement companion. The next 3 areas of interest are the urban actions, the rural actions, and the small community actions. And there is a general similarity into the categories that you're seeing in the table here, but when you look in the plan, the scales, the sizes of the actual projects or actions that we're thinking about implementing in the next 30 years through the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan are different within each of those areas of interest. Same is true of how we address the ongoing investments within each of those areas of interest. 2 concrete examples, the Yolo Bypass multi-improvements. The plan goes in, shows in detail some of the features that we have refined since 2012 and what we're hoping to do with respect to expanding the flood capacity of the Yolo Bypass so that we can have broader system goals of reducing the water levels in this system. And as you can see there, there's more detailed treatment of the expansion of the Fremont Weir. We are actively pursuing the levee setbacks in the Elkhorn Basin. The Sacramento Weir itself, we're talking about expansions. This isn't the gate structure at this point in time, but we're talking about expanding the bypass and the weir, I should say, is we're doing both in there. We have measures to extend the life of the Cache Creek Settling Basin, which is a major tributary to the Yolo Bypass, as well as the Yolo Bypass expansion. I wanted to highlight that Yolo Bypass expansion also looks into conversations as to using some of the deepwater ship channel back to its original purpose, which was originally intended to convey flood flows. So that's included in here. And then we have the additional ecosystem and multi-benefit improvements. For all of our system features, we use the conservation strategy to also outline what ecosystem restoration opportunities exist within those features. And you're seeing a sort of a snapshot of what we're doing there in this graphic here of the Yolo Bypass. The green areas where we've proposed setbacks. The intertie to the ship channel is sitting over here. And then you can see some of the expansion of the Fremont Weir, as well as the Sacramento Weir and Bypass located here. And then the rest of the lines you're seeing in red are the existing state plan and flood control project levees. We also had extensive treatment and refinements to the Paradise Cut bypass system, which was an element that was discussed in the 2012 plan. But what is new in 2017 now is you're seeing similar treatment to the Yolo bypass as to what we would physically like to do there. I would caveat it that with respect to the Yolo bypass, we've been working on that through a number of DWR and state programs for a number of years, that there's more detailed work and consensus what we need to do. For us to proceed on to the Paradise Cut, we are going to have to do some more refined studies out there. But for the purposes of the programmatic plan of the Center Valley Flood Protection Plan, we have enough now to give us a rough cost estimate of what it would take to expand the Paradise Cut, as well as a description of the regional benefits that you get from pulling some of that water in a flood condition off the San Joaquin and allowing it to move through the middle and old rivers within the Delta. Chapter 4, this was the chapter that I've really fought hard to get included within this update of the plan, because I believe this is where we begin to talk reality. This is about the funding and implementation of the actions that were outlined in Chapter 3. This is where the policies come to play. The big elevator speech is our 2017 update has a price tag of $17 billion to $21 billion. It is about $16 billion of one-time capital improvement costs to be implemented over the next 30 years. And for that same time frame, we've estimated a need for $5 billion over the 30 years to maintain those investments and what we have on the ground now. And then what this graphic displays is a breakdown of those costs for the 4 areas of interest, so people can see that we aren't shorting any one of those particular areas of interest. So in this graph, you can see that there is money that's set aside within the plan for small communities, rural areas, in addition to the urban and system-wide buckets. And then we've also listed out the dollar amounts that would be outlined for both the Sacramento and the San Joaquin basins. How are we going to pay for this? That's the real question that's sitting out there. And there is a large treatment in a separate document that will be forthcoming called an investment strategy. We hope to have that out around February. It'll show how we got to those cost estimates, as well as more detail into the effectiveness of those actions in achieving outcomes. But at the end of that investment strategy, we talk about what do we need to do that's different so that we can collectively raise the revenue to actually get that $17 to $21 billion. So we've talked boldly about increasing the general fund. Then there's a series of 3 new mechanisms that we've talked about in the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan update, and that is reutilizing the Sacramento San Joaquin Drainage District. It originally did have some ability to go through and put assessments into the property owners that are within the broader drainage district, and then we could keep that money to come back into the drainage district, and I'll explain why when I finish the other examples here. We have, through the California Water Plan, been looking at a broader statewide river basin assessment where we would have within each river basin an assessment for everybody within that river basin to bring funds to the state so we could reinvest back within each of those specific basins. So we've echoed the work that's coming through that planning document in here. And then the second to last item, which is the last of the new items, is we've talked about actually having a state flood insurance program. That concept was included in the 2005 white paper. The department has done some extensive work over the years about the viability of having a state flood insurance program. But what has changed from 2012 to present is we've had two acts of Congress that have changed the way the National Flood Insurance Program works within California, which has increased the rates that many of our rural our rural landowners pay for their flood insurance. And yet we have a system where across the nation, California is a net donor to the National Flood Insurance Program. And we've been historically, since 1968, paying more in premiums than we've been collecting back out there. And so we want to tap into the ability to provide a cost savings to local landowners through a more locally, in this case, a state-managed flood insurance program, and at the same time use some of the funds that we've been sending to Washington, D.C. to provide better services for Californians to reduce flood risks.
Hang on just a moment, Mike. Commissioner Natoli?
Yeah, Mike, just to back up just for a second on the same slide, but on that Sacramento-San Joaquin Drainage District, so you're going to resurrect about a 100-year-old district and try to go back and start assessing under that criteria?
That's essentially correct, right? It wouldn't be a simple resurrection. There's needs to go through where we would talk about, one, what legal authorities do we really have in there? We'd have to go
With changes
through
in law, I don't.
Right.
Maybe some of those old districts may have a vestige of of some legacy that I guess they can still be legally applied. I don't begin to know the half of it, but I'm just curious about that. May come as a big surprise to some folks, I would imagine. Or no?
Yeah, and some of our stakeholders are reticent about that and the river basin assessment.
Yeah.
And both of those would require us to go through and obviously put proposals together through our resources agency, communicate that over to the administration so that the legislature can be prepared what we want to do. But in doing that, beyond the legal work, we also have to talk about what is the fiscal side of that. What is a reasonable assessment that could be put out there? And this is, I believe, what Melinda is concerned about, having the extension on what the Protection Commission's work has been, is how can we make sure that those two efforts are moving in parallel and moving in the same general direction?
Well, and I guess you'll get down to it in a moment, and it's certainly, I think it's relevant to conversation this commission is going to be having about, Delta Levee Investment, strategies and feasibility and so forth. But, just to harken back to a drainage district that was, at least put in place, I guess close to 100 years ago. I don't know exactly when it was, but probably in the teens or the 20s. And then to talk about a river basin assessment, then go down to local, start talking about benefit assessments and special taxes. As to role definition, certainly state responsibility, local responsibility, changes in law, certainly changes in court rulings. But I think where it really potentially puts local areas at a disadvantage is that if in fact the state can either resurrect and or impose through legislation, obviously impose legislatively, going through the processes that you utilize in doing that, when a lot of the benefit assessment districts at the local level have to be done with the 218, where are limitations, and you got to go out to local landowners, local voters, and yet the overarching, the state can go forward potentially and do either under a 100-year-old formation and or some new river basin assessment district, and that really puts, I think, the local areas who you look to be partners, to be matching dollars, to step up and do a lot of the maintenance, at least in some areas that are if there's no overlap, it sort of coincides with the state system. I would just, again, and I know you're very, very knowledgeable about this, and certainly have done a lot of work over the years, but I would just point that out as being, I think, an area where I think that's potentially fraught with, not just on a financing plan, but on the realities of what people have to live with in their their local communities. Certainly, people want flood protection, and I think have been pretty good about stepping up and doing what they can when they can. But clearly, the locals are at a disadvantage when it comes to the structure of the law and how you go forward. And then if the state comes in and kind of swoops in and gets what they need out of this, I just think it makes it much more difficult if you're going to go out to your fellow landowners as a reclamation district or a county or a city and say, well, we need to step up. And guess what? State's going to put this layer and this layer, and then you got this other existing layer, but we're going to ask you to do more in order to qualify for those monies. Again, maybe you've thought about those mechanics. I don't want to get too far out stray from your presentation this evening, but it occurs to me certainly as a county supervisor and someone who at least has some general knowledge about all of this, that the realities, not that you haven't got a need out there, but I think people ought to be cognizant that if we get our piece of the pie, thinking we're going to put all this together, and then it trickles down to the local and saying, well, we need your piece of the pie. That bank may be pretty empty, and people may be very reticent to step up because everybody else has already gotten the bigger part of the pie on this thing. And I don't know if you've had those discussions. I trust you may have heard that from.
I wanted to talk about that a bit because it is really the discussion to be had, and where I would like the focus on the comments for the flood plan to get into that. The comments and sentiments you brought up are things that we've had both our consulting team and our local and regional partners have brought to our attention as well. The real intent of these three new mechanisms is to look for new creative ways to bring money that is appropriate to really get into the reinvestment and not really the capital improvements, but into the ongoing maintenance and operations activities out there, the vast majority of which is occurring at the local level. When I say ongoing operations, that also includes the floodplain management and residual risk actions. The storm event that we had here, Leslie had indicated really the success that we had in managing the floodwaters throughout the system. Last week, when I was it was Friday plus ago, when I was in there, a lot of my team got conscripted for the night duty for the flood center. That's what happens to planners when a storm comes through. And I managed to pull from my old team. I used to run the river forecasting team here for the state, the forecast estimates of the flow volume coming from that system. And I haven't seen what the actual volume was that was realized, but the forecast actually had this coming in greater than 1986. So we just experienced something that was around, yet again, another 100-year event moving through our system. And having been involved in active flood management activities in the 2005-06 event, I felt that there was a stronger system response for what was less than a 20-year event for something that was close to a 100-year event, just within the investments that we've made in the past 10 years. And this Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, the OMR&R report, the RFMPs, really is about finding ways that we can build up the system capacity, which really means building up that local agency capacity to proactively manage floods and reduce the risks that are happening out there in the system. With respect to these mechanisms, this really is our way to work around the 218. So I've also been having conversations with the County Engineers Association in California, SEAC, which had originally proposed legislation for reform on Proposition 218, provides exemptions so that local agencies could raise the revenue that is needed for proper floodplain management, and I should say flood management. And they ended up pulling that legislation off the books last year because in their polls, they found that it wasn't going to likely pass. And I was a little disappointed to hear that. I'm a big baseball fan, so a batting average of 300% is something that I consider to be a stellar track record. And when you're going through policy, it does take iteration and long conversations with all the affected parties to implement that. And I would have liked to really put out there to the public that the 218, while it protects property owners, it also has consequences for property owners in that there are these what we call deferred maintenance costs that are looming and sitting out there and really hampering the actions of our operations and maintenance activities, as well as it is causing a lot of the stress within the ecosystem that has led to tighter and tighter and tighter regulations and to increasing soft costs that have made it to where some of our capital improvement costs have a soft cost around 40% for environmental restoration. So 40% of our money doesn't go into the design or construction of a new project, but it's going straight into a permitting process. And so this is a way for us to have the state bring that money, put it into programs that can go back out. And where you get to see that is actually in the investment strategy, where we talk about the appropriateness of each of these mechanisms for investing in different actions. So it's an excellent conversation that I would say is welcome to have again and again and again.
Thanks.
The state flood insurance program, just to elaborate a little bit more on that, the money that we could get sort of off the top from those premiums insurance could allow us to update and get better information of what the risks are really to the system, to get better maps out there and get them in the hand of local communities. When we look across the state of California at our FEMA maps, some of the maps are older than I am. And yet we're still going through and prioritizing our investment decisions and building projects formulated on information that's over 40 years old. And what that means is that we're not necessarily getting that cost efficiency out there. So that's one example of where the state would use some of those mechanisms to provide services back out to local agencies. We do talk about in the plan both the federal as well as the local mechanisms that could be utilized also to meet the cost shares out there. And with respect to the federal government, the two big agencies are the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, where the state advocates on behalf of the local agencies for appropriations within the Water Resources Development Act. The last one was called a Water Infrastructure Investment Act, or for the nation, yeah, the WIN. And then FEMA, and it's through the reauthorization of the National Flood Insurance Program where FEMA gets a lot of the money that isn't just for paying off damages associated with flood events, but there are other services that FEMA provides before a flood event comes through. And then we, the local agency, have just the benefit assessments and special taxes, the existing mechanism there. What this means in the context of what we hope to do is there are cost shares that are provided for a variety of scenarios in our investment strategy. We chose what I consider to be the most optimistic future within the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan update. And the reason being is this document is really our advocacy piece back to our legislature as well as Congress of the need to go through and invest in our flood management system. And so what you're looking at is the pie charts from 2012 to 2017, where in 2012 we said that there was about an equal cost share between the federal government and the state, with local agencies being asked to provide 8% of the funds for investing within the state plan of flood control levees, based off of our more detailed work as well as a realization as to really the track record the federal government has been providing in recent years for investing in the system. The cost share has moved to 36% for the federal government, 56% for the state. So we're taking up the majority of that growth as we moved from the 2012 to the 2017 plan, and we're still asking the local agencies to provide about 8%, but we are expecting additional costs associated with that. Sir?
Quick question. In regards to the increase of state costs, that assumes the projections on the previous slides in regards to local assessments, correct? Or is that included within the local assessment?
Oh, yes. So this does assume for these that we are getting local assessments out there, that we are successful, and that Congress is willing to go through and provide additional money to the Army Corps as well as to FEMA, and that we're successful in the next 30 years of getting those additional fund source for the state. Within our investment strategy, we had what I would consider more realistic scenarios, where we look about what's going to happen if we're not having a bond for a number of years, which would be appropriate for capital expenditures. What would happen if the federal government is not going to come in and sustain the level of funding that they've had within the region, with the majority of the Army Corps' money within this region being spent for the joint federal project, which does have wide regional benefits. But we do look in more detail at those other scenarios and describe that process in the investment strategy.
And do we know the percentage of what the projected investment income will be?
I'm not sure.
From the assessments, from the local assessments for the state contribution, do you know what percentage of the state contribution is funded by local assessments?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. So where we begin to close the document is we talk about and establish the context of, in order to achieve these actions, what programs would the state need in order to have all of these actions out there. So this graphic represents those 5 broad mega programs I talked about before, but it begins lining up the programs that our stakeholders they know and are familiar with, where they can go to seek state assistance in implementing those types of activities. We moved from floodplain management, or floodplain risk management and flood management planning, which are proactive investments that are made out there, to the more active investments of flood risk reduction projects, as well as flood system operations and maintenance, to the reactive world of emergency response. An example that you should be familiar with, of course, is the Delta Subventions Program. That is one example. One of the unique things about this update is we recognize the success of the Delta Subventions Program, and have talked about constructing a similar program for the state plan of flood control levies so that we can take some of the money that we're generating through those state mechanisms and pay back to the local agencies the services and the benefits they're providing the general public. Moving into the way forward for each of the 8 policy items that I had outlined before, we then set up a general structure within our plan of what is the issue, a summary of it, what is a near-term milestone that we would like to achieve to show that we're actually making progress, that we're not just setting up a plan with some good recommendations, but we can actually track to something. And then finally, we get into a discussion of the recommended actions. And you'll see for each of the 8 policy items, when you look at the plan, now you're beginning to see specifically what it is we hope to do and change. At this time, I'd like to turn the mic over to Andrea Buckley, and then the two of us would be happy to entertain any other questions.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
you want to take a question now, or you want to take it later?
I can, now it's fine.
I didn't understand, I thought you said that there would be a reduction in soft costs by somehow increasing local assessment by avoiding Prop 218. Is that what, I don't hear well, but it didn't.
Right. I think there's a couple,
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a couple concepts. Right now, the costs that we often have associated with the implementation of our projects, those soft costs, the permitting costs, et cetera, for some of those costs, it's due to the fact that we haven't been in really proactively investing within the ecosystem. And so the regulatory agencies then come up with species by species rules on how we would go through and protect those species, which then pass those costs onto the project implementers. By having the ability over time to assess and invest within the ecosystem and show that we can make progress towards reducing some of those ecosystem stressors, this is the multi-benefit project aspect and theme that runs through the plan, we would hope that we could begin to demonstrate that the regulatory environment that sits out there could provide a little bit more flexibility onto projects. There are other actions within the plan where we also talk about programmatic permitting. So what are some of the agreements and actions that we can take in advance that allow the state and local agencies to take on ongoing maintenance activities without having to go through as rigorous a project-by-project environmental process?
I understand that. The relationship to avoiding the Prop 218 was what I didn't understand. What you're looking at is funding it with local money. Have you given any thought to taking a segment of the revenue or the resources that go into the program and taking that and doing separate environmental projects so that we don't have to do a project-by-project implementation that is burdened by all the endangered species and all the regulatory costs associated with just dealing with the process?
Yes.
We did that for a while, with the Delta Levee program.
Right, and it's still continuing with the special projects, correct?
I think that helped quite a bit and reduced the cost and produced a better project and a better product for the environment.
Right. I think that's an excellent segue, and I can either, you want me to answer this one? Okay. It really leads into this conservation strategy slide here. So Andrea will talk about the advisory committee, but I'll talk a little more detail about the conservation strategy. It was one of the 4 key supporting documents for this updated Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. And in the conservation strategy, we really talk not only about this regulatory environment, but what are the actions that we can take within the context of the flood system, because that is what the scope of this plan is about. It's not everything ecosystem. It really is just where ecosystem overlaps with our flood system. What is it that we can do out within that area that can achieve some of the ecosystem, I would say, restoration? We didn't go and look for areas for enhancement within the conservation strategy, yet those still do exist within the state. Then threading back to your question, when we're trying to go through and implement a project, we also recognize that if you can bundle things together within a single project, and this is what you're seeing within the context of Paradise Cut as well as Yellow Bypass, we can get really a 2-for-1 or 3-for-1 benefit through the same land use, where we can improve a flood management system and at the same time, in that same space, also achieve ecosystem restoration. And not only does that prevent us from cascading and having a mosaic where we have areas that are single-focused ecosystem and single-focused flood, but it also allows us to bring a broader portfolio of funding partnerships to the table to invest within those projects. And the Delta is a good example. The department actually has requested, and I believe has a grant from another state agency, Cal Fish and Wildlife, to go through and do an ecosystem restoration project on Sherman Island. And the intent of that is not just to get the ecosystem restoration on Sherman Island, but also to go through and address the rate of subsidence due to some of the grazing of what is state water project lands out there, so that we have less tension within the levees on Sherman Island so we can protect that island over time. And so that is a perfect example of a multi-benefit project. In this case, it's part state water project, part state plan of flood control levee, where they extend down on the Sacramento River and the San Joaquin River there on Sherman Island. Did I?
Yeah, I think in some cases, there is an advantage for going into one project, but trying to force a multi-benefit on every flood control project, a lot of times it doesn't make any sense and really adds to the cost. So I think concentrating on areas, larger areas, in particular locations where it's clear that you can do that, makes more sense.
Right, and we completely agree. Within the description of the plan itself and the investment strategy, we talk about outcomes via portfolios of actions. And so the intent to de-emphasize the traditional project-by-project focus allows it that if project proponents come up with 2 different projects that we would consider single-purpose projects, but together you could say, well, they could achieve more than what you could have gotten out of just one multi-benefit, we welcome that as well. So that general philosophy and approach is within Chapter 3 of the plan and dealt with in more detail in Chapters 3 and 4 of the investment strategy.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Andrea?
Thank you. Andrea Buckley with Central Valley Flood Protection Board, Environmental Services. So I just wanted to take a minute to hit on the Conservation Strategy Advisory Committee. In August 2014, the board heard from stakeholders wishing to activate this committee for the conservation strategy. The stakeholders wanted a voice in the flood planning process in the development of conservation objectives. So in November 2015, with board member representatives and staff support, the first meeting was convened, and this open membership included the environmental NGOs, reclamation districts and LMAs, agricultural community, and the federal and state regulatory agencies. It was a little contentious at first, but after several months of discussion, this multi-stakeholder group recognized that the problem appeared to be, in many areas, that it was primarily one of perception and not actually disagreement. The committee eventually gained consensus and provided the board the conservation strategy recommendation document at the October 2016 board meeting. This document contained 24 specific recommendations. The board will be using this document as they consider the plan. Part of the success of the advisory committee was during that time they were meeting, DWR was finalizing the update to the 2015 conservation strategy. DWR staff continually met with the advisory committee and attended meetings. Therefore, they incorporated, to some extent, some of the recommendations that were already in the recommendation document. So once the document, conservation strategy, came out, some of those have already been incorporated. That document is available on our website as well as the conservation strategy. Does this work? We can talk about, now that the plan is out, there's also an accompanying CEQA document that came out December 30th of 2016. That document is comment period. Both the CEQA document and the plan is open until March 31st, 2017. So we have quite a bit of time to accept comments. Both of those CEQA document and the plan are available on the Central Valley Flood Protection Board's website. Yeah, go ahead and move the next one if you could, sorry. We have 5 public hearings scheduled. Most notably, we have one in Stockton, and we hope that we can get some Delta involvement in that one. But our first one is in Marysville on February 9th. So we're looking forward to receiving comments and look forward to receiving comments from Delta communities. That's all I had.
Okay. Any questions? Thank you, Andrea. Oh, I'm sorry.
This is probably for Mike, so.
Oh, okay.
Or you can answer it, though, if you'd like to. I appreciate certainly the presentation and all the time that's been spent in regards to putting this presentation and this plan together. I guess to some extent, though, I'm a little bit, I guess, frustrated from the standpoint that, for example, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which we're dealing with certainly in my county, and I chair the board on that particular with 21 agencies. And we've been working through that process to identify agencies, et cetera, and also to develop a plan whereby we'll be able to replenish our aquifers. And so that's of paramount concern, certainly throughout the state. The second part of it is that, and by the way, DWR has been extremely helpful in regards to that process. They attend our meetings, and they've been very creative in ways that they've assisted us in making some decisions along the way. Obviously, one of the considerations is to how to replenish our aquifers, which essentially comes from surface water, and then the next thing that happened is the State Water Control Board then wants to increase the flows, which obviously would affect our ability to replenish our aquifers. So that's another issue. And now we're talking tonight in regards to flood management. And the fact of the matter is that all 3 areas involve water, which is as precious as gold or oil. And it would seem to me that one of the things, as opposed to talking about flood management, we would talk in terms of how we could better capture the excess water that we're experiencing currently in these storms. I attended a meeting of all the reclamation districts in my county last Friday, and I signed a proclamation, emergency proclamation. But I was kind of I guess, educated to some extent in regards to almost every district that gave a report on the status of their particular levees, et cetera. There was talk about, going back probably to the 80s, that these levees have not been dredged. There's debris in them. There's sandbars in them, which obviously affect the flows or ability to move the water away from the levees and downstream. And for that reason, and I don't know, and you mentioned it, I don't know if you're alluding to this, but, as far as the increased flows, the releases from whether it be Comanche or or Don Pedro or whatever, Folsom, et cetera, the question arises over the years, our reservoirs have filled up with silt. The capacity is no longer what it used to be. Our flows, our capability of flowing water down these levees and channels and rivers is not what it used to be because of the increased sediment that's settling there. And so I guess the question is, it would seem to me one of the things that would be a priority in regards to cleaning up our waterways to allow them to be fully serviced by our needs, whether it be floods or excess water, et cetera. And the other part of it is it would seem to me also that probably one of the best preventions of flooding would be to capture more water upstream so it doesn't overflow or break dikes, levees, as happened in my county. And the other thing is I think sometimes we think in terms of regions, whether it be the Delta or the San Joaquin Valley, Southern California, et cetera. But I found, at least in my tenure with other supervisors throughout the state, is we're kind of all in this together. The mountain counties, for example, are in desperate need of forest management. They're the watersheds that supply us. They're begging for assistance, whatever we can provide them, either political support or finances through the state or federal government. Certainly the Valley counties, Southern California, all these things. And I guess what concerns me is that this isn't a flood issue in the Delta or this region. This is a water issue statewide. And we should be talking in terms not just of this particular aspect of our water management, but we need to be talking about the other aspects in regards to how do we prevent the excess water from coming and damaging our levees that have not maybe been properly maintained, et cetera. And I would also offer that when you talk about, you'd mentioned with the figures from the 2012 plan, a little less than $1.5 billion was for projects, out of what, almost $5 billion. Was that basically the estimate that you gave from the previous plan 5 years ago? Those basically the numbers. And we're talking about, 17 to 21 billion over the next 30 years. My concern, which has been at least alluded to previously, is where's this money come from? There is a lot to be done. There's only a finite amount of money, and what I would hope that we can work more collaboratively in all elements that depend upon our water to come up with plans that would be less costly, maybe more efficient, and certainly I believe that everybody would benefit from the enhanced availability of water, whether it be for the environment, for municipalities, or certainly agriculture. So, great job. Appreciate the input. I had this presentation yesterday from DWR at our Water Advisory Board, but I commend you for that. I just think we need to look a little larger, picture in regards to how this interconnects with our groundwater management, our surface water management, and certainly the Delta levees, which obviously can be improved on. So, thank you.
Thank you. I would like to just add one thing, which I think you'll appreciate, is the 1957 California Water Plan, so this is the original Bulletin 3, had an excellent pull-out in the back that showed the state of California, and it had a Venn diagram where it identified areas of recent flooding. So this is a reference to the 1955 Christmas Eve floods that came through the state. It also identified areas of water supply deficiencies. And then the last of the VINs they identified across the state were the areas of water quality contamination, and they were concerned about the salt water moving in where you had overdraft in the coastal areas, largely in that plate that was sitting in the original water plan. And the water plan itself is one of the vehicles that we're trying to be consistent within this plan and also allow the financing and investment work in this plan to help put more detail into the water plan so that you and others may go through and see that comprehensive plan of where everything's fitting together.
Thank you. See, Mike, that's why you have the job you have.
Okay, Mike, thank you.
Thank you.
Was there another speaker after Natasha? That's the end of the presentation. Any other commissioner comments or questions? Anyone in the audience, public, that would like to comment on this item?
Well, thank you, both the Flood Protection Board and DWR, and I hope that you all found that really informative, and it's why I requested it, so I hope you really did. As you know, I'm the Executive Director of the Flood Control Association. Counties, cities, and reclamation districts are our members, and we go down to about Tracy and, I don't know, somewhere close to Chico area, maybe down to Tracy. I just did a handout, because, oops, sorry, that might have been me. As the executive director of the association, is kind of my job I attend both the flood protection board meetings, I attend all these Delta agency meetings and I have to put the pieces together for my members. And so I had prepared this for my Delta members, the RDs that are members, so that they can see visually the various fees that are being proposed in both the DPC study and then the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. And I handed out, the handout that I have you then shows those fees that are being proposed in both. But if you notice on the second page is a map, and I thought it would be just helpful for my members and therefore maybe for you to see that, as we mentioned, the drainage district was created, probably 100 years ago, and they did collect assessments in the early part of the 20th century. They eventually abandoned collection of those fees during the Depression, the Great Depression, because there was non-payment, as you can imagine, during those times. But the statute for them, just like they do for RDs, allows for liens and foreclosures. And the state, this is a state entity, the drainage district, started foreclosing on these properties. And as you can imagine, there was a political uprising, and the legislature finally said, "Okay, forget it. We're not going to collect this anymore." And to my knowledge, they've not collected it since that Great Depression time. So, but that is the boundary for which, and you can see it goes all the way from Butte down to Fresno. So anywhere within that, they can collect the property assessments on that. And then, but the difference, the really concern that the association has, and why I prepare something like this for my members, it's the potential for the layering on of these state-collected fees on top of the reclamation district. Because the state, as you heard, does not have to abide by Prop 218, which means they don't have to get a vote of the people in order to decide what amount the fee is going to be and when they want to increase it. But when the reclamation district needs to increase its assessment rate, it does have to go for the vote of people, and they can say no. And we've seen that in the state responsibility area for the wildfire protection, where once the state started implementing the state fee on these property owners, then when the local fire districts tried to do their Prop 218 election, some of them started getting those no votes. And when they polled the people afterwards, they're like, well, because we're already paying that other $153, and this is for the same thing, you say, and why am I paying everybody? No, I said no this time. And you live within your means, sort of thing. And so the concern becomes that when you see the state start collecting these layered fees without having to do that, the local agencies can end up getting capped, right? Because now the voters aren't going to say yes anymore. So whatever their rate was at that time, you may get stuck with that. One other thing I had to say, let me read my note really quick. I will say that even the fees that came out in the flood plan were kind of new concepts to us, as well as the DPC's fees were to us. So just like with you, we're expecting to be able to have some conversations through the public process that the flood board has to try to understand their fees a little bit better, talk about the feasibility with them as well.
Okay,
And then,
Melinda, I don't mean to interrupt, but 3 minutes is...
yeah. The only other thing I'll say is their Conservation Strategy Advisory Committee was really great, and they allowed us to do it. They did not drive it. We did, the NGOs, the farm bureaus, and our association, and we did come to consensus. So if you let us do it, we can. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to address the commission? Seeing none, this was just to receive the report. Is that correct, Erik?
Yeah, that's correct, Mr. Chair. And staff will be looking at this document. We anticipate preparing a comment letter by the comment deadline on this. But this evening was just really an opportunity to brief commission members about the 2017 update.
Okay,
Questions?
thank you.
Mr. Chair, just for the comment letter, if I could. Sure. Yeah, Erik, will you present that to a draft, or will it just be a staff comment? Because again, I think to at least some of the questions that I had earlier, again, maybe pertaining to financing, Melinda obviously echoed those and was even more specific. I'm not sure that would be, staff would necessarily take those same concerns? I don't know. I mean, obviously you heard one commission member weigh in on that. So how is it that, relative to the plan, recognizing there's a lot of good work here that talks about, what's going to be required for as investment, where does improvements might occur and how that would balance itself out. But key to all that is, I think as Mike pointed out very clearly in the presentation, the theme running through there is you got to have money to do this, and it has to come from somewhere. And so with the staff comment letter, is it that you would seek comments from commissioners? I mean, I've offered mine, just at least in general terms. And again, I don't know how much weight this commission and its commissioners, individually or collectively, carries as it relates to this plan. I think we have some, and I think the presentation was very helpful this evening. So I guess my question, Mr. Chair, is to Erik, not to bog down the process for you making commentary on behalf of the commission, but certainly you don't just do it on behalf of one or two commissioners, you do it on behalf of the commission. So
Well, the comment deadline is March 31st. The commission will next meet on March 16th, I believe.
Okay.
And so we could certainly queue this up as a proposed comment letter from the commission, much as we've
Like
done
you've done with the
tonight
next
with the
item.
Levee Investment Strategy.
Okay.
And that was something I debated, knowing that there's interest. I knew that there was interest amongst commission members, but knowing the level of interest in this, we can certainly queue that up. So it is a draft letter for commission consideration, and when we do that, the letter goes out under the chair's signature.
Okay.
As
Again-
opposed to our normal course with commenting on land use projects where the staff, your executive director signs off on those letters.
I guess, you skip. I just say I think it rises to that level. Again, I think staff will do their, work and review this and offer other comments that may not have occurred to certain commission members and/or in this presentation this evening. But I think that's fine. I think that works, and I'd like to see that come back first. Thanks.
They're fine. Okay, we're going to move on to item number 10, receive a report on Delta Recreation Inventory and Delta Recreation Research. Adele Lagomarsino. Yeah. Adele, welcome.
That's great. Thank you. Chair Thompson and commission members, it's my pleasure tonight to present to you a recreation update, some of the work we've been doing in recreation.
You're going to have to speak up, Adele.
Okay, how about if I get closer? Make sure I can make this work. Is it the top one? Is it going to work? Thanks. Okay. So tonight, what I wanted to present to you is a 2015 inventory of recreation facilities and the recreation research agenda that was we put together in 2016. So to give you a little background information, could you go to the next slide? The first inventory of recreation facilities that the commission did was in 1997, and it was updated in 2005. And then with the development of the economic sustainability plan, there was kind of an supplement of recreation inventory of Delta resources. So with the assistance of the California State Parks, we began preparing source contacts lists, updating GIS data within the inventory, and they created a database for us actually to store this information. So this recreation inventory, which I have here, and we have not provided to you in detail, you can probably figure out why, is just a snapshot of time. That's the important thing to remember about the inventory. It's a snapshot of 2014, 2015 resources. What you'll find in the inventory is we modeled this, the inventory on the 2005 in a lot of ways, the tables, and we have summarized facilities in the Delta, recreation facilities by county, by type, and we've defined those resources. Our geographic area is the legal delta and facilities immediately adjacent. If you go to the next slide. So the tables, the facilities that we captured, and we've added a few new ones to the 2012, is, so to give you an example, in 2005 we had wineries. We expanded that to agritourism. So not only did we capture wineries, but we captured U-pick operations, places that had, say, hay rides, corn mazes, that type of thing. We also captured boating access instead of just boat launches. And I had to ask our consultants myself, what's the difference between boating access and a boat launch? And a boat launch is something that would be concrete, you can drive your car, launch your boat. Boating access would be more where you could take, you know, you might park your car in the parking lot, and then the access actually is you haul your kayak, you know, a couple yards, several yards down and launch your boat. We also included event venues for the 2012 inventory, and that's a new category also. So in the inventory, we not only included these by, and if you go to the next one, by the type of facility. So I've given you an example of fishing access, and you'll see on the left side, each facility is given a unique site number, which we use in the maps to identify where they're located. The facility name, basically the city, the island where it's located, the county, and then if it's in the secondary or primary zone. Next slide. We also have them listed by the county they're located in. So naturally, we have 5 counties that show that. The inventory also, we tried to do some data analysis, and the key findings that we found was that agritourism is an emerging opportunity in the Delta. Not only do we have, now remember the last inventory was 2005, so since that time we have Sacramento River grown, we have harvest time in Brentwood has taken off, we have probably a dozen more wineries in Yolo County. We also found that the economic downturn affected Delta recreational boating. Since the 2012 supplement that was done for the Economic Sustainability Report, we found about a dozen marinas have closed. And lastly, we found that, that our hope for performing of trend analysis was hindered by, we were counting from the 2005 inventory, 1997 inventory. It appeared we were kind of counting apples and bananas because we didn't define what agritourism was. As I said, in 2005, it was just wineries. Well, we expanded that, so it was hard to make that analysis in many places. So we came up with some recommendations. And our recommendations was promotion of the Delta as a recreation resource. So online resource guide, social media, wayfinding would really help promote Delta recreation. Research and study. As I said, the consistency in reporting of facilities would help that. Visitation trends, cultural, economic impacts, agricultural tourism, that would be helpful to find. And then also access the need for new facilities. In planning, development of the National Heritage Area, the Delta Trail, and control of aquatic species. The next one. So this is an example of one of the maps that were developed by State Parks and refined by Cal State Chico for us. So this is an overall, what do I want to say? Kind of the guide for the many maps that are in there. I believe there's probably about a dozen. And if you go to the next one, so we have the Delta, we zero in more on an area, and the next one will zero in more on 3I, and we have an area, Weber Tract, and you'll see, it's kind of hard, I'm sorry that the slide's not real clear, the dots and there's numbers, and those represent the different facilities. So our inventory is available online. If you'd like a copy, we'd be happy to make you one, but we haven't done that yet. We are promoting it through, it's been announced in our Delta Voice that the inventory is ready and complete. One more slide. I wanted to mention one more thing. Is it going forward? The other thing that Parks provided us was a database, and this is what's going to help us in the future. Is that, it's not going? Okay. Anyway, so what the slide was the data entry of the database. And so what we were able to capture with that is the facility, the owner, the physical location, a mailing address, the latitude, longitude, so that we can map it, and the amenities provided at a facility. So the inventory is going to be used by not only, we're hoping, Delta recreation providers and local governments, but also by the Delta Conservancy as they create the Delta Recreation and Tourism website. And in fact, they're going to be using the maps will be coming up soon. I believe that site's going to be live maybe next month, is their plan. And what we're hoping is, and it's mentioned in the Delta Voice on our website, is that recreation providers, we know that this is a snapshot in time. In order to keep this information dynamic, we're asking Delta recreation providers to send us updates. Email us and we'll update this in our database, and so that in another 5-10 years when we update the inventory, it'll be a snap. We'll have that information, and we're helping to improve and promote Delta-wide tourism and recreation. So.
Don, just a moment. Adele.
Yeah, a question about how you might get a broader distribution of this. I don't know how you might link this with other websites so that people, if they're doing searches to get information, again, I know Sacramento County has, a Delta page on its, website. Think about the Sacramento Convention Visitors Bureau. There are others, in Stockton, and I'm sure in Contra Costa, and all the counties have different groups that might be good linkages for folks.
Absolutely. Well, so the Conservancy is working on a Delta marketing task force. And so it's our hopes is that, our plan is that we'll be keeping the inventory update for a while, and that this marketing task force, which will be made up hopefully of Delta recreation providers, will maintain the database, and we're creating a link with Visit California, so that when you go to Visit California, you go to Central Valley, Delta, this is a resource.
This pops up first, right?
I wouldn't say it pops up first. It's a resource.
There are folks that can make sure it pops up
Yeah.
first, so.
Well, that will be up to the Delta marketing task
Well,
force.
again, and I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it takes money, that's right, but,
everything does.
yeah, again, and Visit California is fine, but I do think there are other conventions
Okay.
that, I'm gonna ask that we look at doing the linkage, and keeping updates fine, but I think getting folks that make natural linkages for this so that you can get to this, if it doesn't pop up first, I get that, but I mean, you can find it different ways, and you may not know what you're looking for, but all of a sudden you discover the Delta, and I just think it's, you can do it from the ease of your, your personal, device or computer or whatever, so I just, again, I think it's good work, I think, updating is swell, but if people can't find it easily or don't find it easily accessible, then it doesn't really, I think, achieve its potential, and that's part of the promotion. So I'm not putting that off on you, but I just think there's some linkages that are natural ones that would be partners. And again, I think certainly local officials on this body and as well as state officials probably assist with that and maybe do it very easily, where it's just a matter of getting somebody to make that connection in the IT, and there it is. So anyway, that's my comments.
Thank you, Don.
Okay. Let me put my glasses back on. So the second item is a Delta Recreation Research Agenda. So why we went into this endeavor was to help encourage and improve Delta recreation and tourism. So what we did was we started basically with the basics, which is what we know about Delta recreation, what we don't know, and what opportunities should we know about. So the current, what we know basically, we defined in the recreation research, and this is also will be made available to you. I don't believe we put it in your packet also. It's not as big. I don't have it here. But we can make it available for you if you'd like. Is that we classified what we know, Delta recreation as nature-oriented, basically fishing, hunting, boating, non-boating recreation, cultural and heritage and agricultural tourism, and transportation-oriented tourism, that right-of-way, the highways, the scenic byways, and the connectivity. So with the help of researchers at California State University, we asked them to present three scopes of work for 3 research projects in recreation. And so those 3 research projects were non-motorized boating study. So what that would be a user online survey asking tourist recreationists where they travel, use levels, conflicts with other recreation groups, other activities they engage in, information needs, facility needs, and spending patterns while they're recreating in the Delta. Also, we would be creating an attendance survey of annual and season estimates of numbers visiting using non-motorized watercraft. So what this basically hits upon is the emergence of non-motorized boating paddle sports, such as stand-up paddling, kayaking, which has taken off in California and across the nation. The second potential research project involves cultural tourism and agritourism in the Delta and the economic impact of special events. Again, this would be an online survey of visitors' preference and information sources when they visit the Delta, what they engage in, where they stay, spending patterns, what additional tourism infrastructure they would like to see in the Delta. There would also be a field survey that would be at events where we would question attendees and vendors on spending patterns and attendance counts. Actually, we wouldn't be questioning them. There would be probably students. The third research project, or that would be social and environmental barriers to positive tourism development in the Delta. This would be a survey of current visitors to the Delta, and what we would be asking them is potential conflicts of user groups, such as private lands, agricultural, recreation conflicts, recreation facility issues such as lack of fishing access and boat launches, lack of beach frontages, and then natural resource barriers such as water gates, screens, barriers. Also, there would be a survey of non-visitors that currently participate in recreation activities that happen in the Delta, but they don't come to the Delta. So it would be, basically, what is it about the Delta that you don't come? The estimated budget for each one of these potential research projects was approximately $100,000 each. And if you go to the next slide. So our next steps for that would be to seek funding to get some of these research projects happening.
Supervisors.
So that could be done through the BCP process, budget change process in the state budget, grant opportunities, or collaborative partnerships with maybe other agencies, local governments. So the research agenda, as I said, is not online. It's more of a staff document. If we were able to get potential funding, we would have these scopes of works ready to go to conduct this research and help us, again, promote tourism in the Delta and recreation use. And that was it for the recreation update. Was there any other questions?
Questions?
Yeah.
Dante?
Have you looked into the lack of fish as an impact on recreation in the Delta?
Bring your own.
For the period since about 1968, when the state
I
water
think there's other
project
places
started
studying that,
operating.
so we can save our money
You're gonna
there.
bring your own fish.
But I appreciate that.
Bring your own fish, huh, Dante? All right, any other comments?
If I may.
Sure, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks for the update and learning about your efforts on the Delta. One thing I might encourage you to do is reach out to some of the cities in the Delta. I can encourage you to talk to our city here in West Sacramento. One of the areas that we are learning sort of organically through what we see our own residents doing and people coming in from the residents is the increase in bicycling as a sport. And I know many friends who are into road biking, and they don't fish, they don't use watercraft, but they are riding through the Delta almost every weekend for very long treks. And as we are continuing to move on and trying to create our portion of the trail system going south that leads down to Clarksburg, we're encouraging this, and it's really it's growing. So it's just a word of encouragement to maybe reach out to some of the economic development folks in the cities, get some feedback from them, because we are actively promoting ourselves as the gateway to the Delta. We are actively pursuing trail systems that encourage biking, and it all leads south because it's beautiful. It's a beautiful scenic area to go, and there's lots of roads out there to go explore. So again, and it's non-watercraft way, but again, if we're trying, the goal is to increase tourism and sites, it might be another way to get people to explore. So just some feedback.
Good points. Thank you, Chris. Any other comments? Kate?
Yeah, Kate with the State Transportation Agency, and I just wanted to echo the last comments and just to point out that the governor's proposed budget includes an additional $100 million a year for active transportation program, which is administered by the California Transportation Commission and Caltrans, and so those are some great sources of funding. It's pretty much doubling the current budget for the active transportation program. So those include biking projects and walking projects that the Delta would be eligible for. A lot of the cities in the Delta would be eligible for.
Thank you for that, Kate. Okay. Any other questions, comments?
Well, I just want to invite you to come back next, in March. We will be doing an update on the Delta Trail.
Okay, Adele, thank you very, very much for that report. Okay, we're going to move on to item 11, the consideration of the commission comment letter on the Delta Stewardship Council's proposed amendments to the Delta Plan, Chapter 7, the Delta Levee Investment Strategy. Erik?
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. As commission members know, the Delta Stewardship Council has been embarked upon a Delta Levee Investment Strategy effort for a couple of years now. Throughout much of that period of time, we've had our own parallel effort looking at levee financing. You heard comments on that earlier. We'll certainly have more discussion of that at our March commission meeting. A little bit of background, and this is in the staff report. The commission adopted a levee statement at its November 2015 meeting. This was something that had been drafted by the Delta Protection Advisory Committee. And it was very broad and high-level statement, but it was helpful in informing the commission's support of legislation during the last legislative session having to do with the Delta Levee Subvention Program and the extension of the sunset for the 75-25% cost share legislation that went to the governor but was ultimately vetoed by the governor. That was the comment from the commission was directly related to the levee statement that the commission adopted at its November 2015 meeting. And it's that levee statement that informs this proposed comment letter to the Delta Stewardship Council on their proposed amendments to Chapter 7 of the Delta Plan. Chapter 7 is reducing risks to life, property, and state interests in the Delta. And it's basically where the Stewardship Council places its flood protection and levee improvement policies. That's the section of the Delta Plan. I appreciate that Dan Ray, the Deputy Executive Officer of the Delta Stewardship Council, has joined us here this evening. He certainly would be available to answer any questions that the Commission has about the Levee Investment Strategy effort, or specifically about the proposed amendments to Chapter 7 of the Delta Plan. Included in the Commission member packet was a proposed comment letter from the Commission. I certainly understand the importance of these levee issues. It's really the foundation of everything that we hold dear throughout the entire Delta region. And without levees, we don't have the unique Delta values that our Commission is to speak for as the state embarks upon accomplishing its co-equal goals in a manner that protects and enhances those unique Delta values. So the draft comment letter, and actually there's a slightly revised version of the draft comment letter that's in that packet of papers. It's a red line, so you can recognize it from the cover with some red line additions. Blake or Adele, I don't know if members of the audience grabbed a copy of that on the table out front, but there were ample copies for the audience there. If you wouldn't mind grabbing those if people did not pick that up. Basically, the comment letter is a statement from the Commission about the importance of Delta levees. It goes more deeply into a recommendation that was included in the 2012 Economic Sustainability Plan about the improvement and maintenance of all Delta levees, to what at that time we were referring to as the Public Law 84-99 standard. What we hear today from the Delta levee community is that the DWR Bulletin 192-82 standard, which is very similar to the Corps of Engineers standard, but doesn't have a lot of the baggage, if you will, that accompanies the Corps implementation of 84-99, would that the desire is to move more toward that state determined standard rather than the federal standard. It all would improve the condition of Delta levees, certainly not improve Delta levees to the condition that they all need to be in, but provides a base level of protection that can really support the system-wide integrity of Delta levee systems. And then if there's a need or a desire to protect beyond that base level of protection, this letter suggests that is where the Levee Investment Strategy and the prioritization for future state investments in Delta levees can be accomplished. Here's a few more copies too, Blake, if you could add those to the pile. So the letter begins with some basic statements relative, a lot of them restating recommendations that were in the Economic Sustainability Plan, and then beginning on page 2, moving into very specific proposed recommendations for the Chapter 7 amendments to the Delta Plan. I can walk through these individually. I wanted to present this to the Commission. It's always a more, we always have a letter that creates more impact if it's adopted by the entire Commission, if it goes out under the Commission Chair's signature on behalf of the entire Commission. I think this issue rises to that level. That would certainly be my recommendation. It is certainly also possible that this could be a letter from your Commission staff if there's any concern about either specific language in this letter or just the fact that the Commission's taking this stand relative to the proposed amendments to the Delta Plan. The primary change in the red line version is just a slightly different way of calling out our statutory obligation to provide recommendations to the Stewardship Council on ways to preserve the Delta and as they go about implementing the Delta Plan. And so that's really our lead-in here. It's really our statutory call to be advising the Stewardship Council on ways to protect and enhance the unique Delta values as they go about developing and implementing the Delta Plan. And then on page 2, just really some more clarifying changes to be clear that in the first instance that the DWR stockpiles is what we're referring to as opposed to just emergency stockpiles of rock material. And then at the bottom, toward the lower part of page 2, just really kind of restating a statement that had been repeated and making the letter shorter and more clear, hopefully as a result. Anyway, I apologize. This background I provided is kind of ping-pong across a few different issues. I'd be happy to take any questions or comments from the commission members at this point.
Dante.
I read the letter. It looks very good to me. It's very important that this commission weigh in with the Stewardship Council because their proposal takes a good number of levees systems in the Delta and puts them in what they call an other category. That means there will not be any state funding for improvement, only state funding for maintenance. That's going to put us in a very precarious position that I think is not good for anybody, Delta, the water projects, or anything like that. The Delta, in my view, is a system. You have to keep it at least up to some minimum engineering standard, and then if you want to go above it, protect against earthquakes and all this and that. You can do that selectively, but we can't leave the Delta in a condition without a minimum engineering standard being met. And this letter goes to that, and I didn't have anything to do to write it, but it's something very consistent with the position that we put forth with the Central Delta Water Agency. But I think the Stewardship Council draft is headed in the wrong direction. And I've shared that with Mr. Ray. He's probably tired of hearing me, but anyway, I think it's a real significant flaw that this letter addresses. So I think it's a good letter.
Thank you, Dante. Don.
Yeah, just a quick follow-on and appreciate the work that's gone into the letter. I'm wondering if it wouldn't make sense as it relates to the subvention program, the cost-sharing provisions that, again, not knowing how much specifics, I see the background in our packet here, but I think one of the things that could be, and again, Dante and others on this commission could speak to it, and certainly those in the audience, that the current cost share of the 75-25 that was proposed to go to 50-50, and that was, I guess there's still a sunset in that. We talk about the value of this program, and it says has been supportive. We are supportive. I would even put that in the current context. And again, I don't know if it makes sense if it gets into too much detail, but I do think it's important that it's one thing to say there's going to be a subvention program and that there's some ratio, but again, those that are with the reclamation districts in this room, the difference between 25-75 and a 50-50 split is the difference between doing a project and not, probably in a lot of cases. And we spend several sentences here talking about the $1,000 per mile deductible, which can be impactful. But I got to believe that any change in that ratio, particularly on the order of magnitude of basically doubling up on that, example that was pointed out to me in the conversation was that if you had $1 million project, under the current standard, it's, the local rec district or parties would come up with $250,000 of that. If it were to go to the 50-50, that's $500,000. And I mean, everybody can do the math, but it seems to me, so I don't know how we might incorporate that. Again, I put it out there for consideration by my colleagues, and there may be those in the audience who want to talk about this, but that seems to me that's a big point. It's important, and I think it's not just about maintaining a commitment to a subvention program, but maintaining a commitment to a ratio that, when you want your local partners, to my comments earlier this evening on the Central Valley report, that, you can only squeeze so much, water out of that rock, and before you, at some point in time, people just got to stand up. They'll stand up and say, "I can't do it anymore." And I think that that's not what we want. That's not what the state wants. I would hope and believe. And so, I don't know, Eric, if you want to respond, if there are others on the commission, but it seems to me that needs to be called out.
Yeah, well, I think it's certainly consistent with that November 2015 statement that the commission adopted. I mean, one of the items in that statement was to retain the levee subvention program in its current form, which I think presumes that 75-25 split.
Okay.
So I think it would be entirely consistent to incorporate that. I didn't exclude it for any reason other than it wasn't specifically called out for in Chapter 7, in the amendments to Chapter 7 of the Delta Plan, but this is also our opportunity for the commission to make its statements
Say we want that to be a part of the amendment, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it would be entirely appropriate to include it.
And if I may, I had the opportunity to watch the video for the Delta Stewardship Council, and I want to say that our former chair, Mary Pifo, did a great job of trying to force the issue of the Delta Stewardship Council should support the Delta Subvention Fund, and the Stewardship Council pushed back on that. They didn't want to say it in those terms, and I think to your point about what our charge is, we ought to be very firm. And I think you put it in politically correct terms, but I'm wondering if we couldn't be even a little more forceful. You said it would be appropriate for the council to make a strong statement of support. Could we say it's imperative, it's from our perspective, it's incumbent upon them to be very specific about supporting the Delta Levees program? I mean, Mr. Zuckerman, Gil Cozio both stood up and very eloquently talked about how important that program is to the Delta. So I think we ought to be firm in pointing that out and requiring, based on our support of the levee program, that they ought to be talking about supporting it, not simply saying, and I'll read what it currently says in the draft. It says, funding for maintenance of levees shall continue to be available. And Mary Pifo said that it should be substituted, and we ought to be saying the Delta Stewardship Council supports the program. So I'd like to see something like that. Maybe I'm not politically correct, even though I'm a politician, but I think it's important that the Stewardship Council know exactly what this commission feels about that program. I'd like to hear from the rest of you. Todd?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think generally the letter is fine. I'm fine with the principles that were laid out in the briefing materials. I do want to. I don't, on this one item about prioritization, it's found on page 2, I think, of the letter. I don't think that it's unreasonable to prioritize, from the state's interests at least, when it comes to upgrades. Obviously, I understand and appreciate Mr. Nomolini's comment about the system, but when you're talking about the state's interests and prioritizing, I just don't think that that's an unreasonable concept, and I'd maybe be curious to know staff's perspective on that section of the letter a little bit.
Yeah, what I was trying to do there, I hope it's stated clearly enough, is, and this is something we've heard from the Delta Levee community, that there should be an imperative to improve the system up to a base level of protection. And upon that, and frankly, we're really close to getting there with the funding that's available in existing bond measures, especially the money that's available through Prop 1. It's a huge down payment on the amount, and these are estimates from the levee engineer community. It's a huge down payment on the amount that's needed to bring the entire system up to that base level of improvement. So what this letter was trying to say was continue those efforts, bring the system up to a base level improvement. Additional improvements beyond that, such as Commissioner Nomolini mentioned, for seismic risk, or because there's more valuable assets at risk that demand a higher level of protection, then subject that to the levee prioritization policy, and make your investments first at the very high level group of islands, and then work your way down the list. That was the intention, and maybe it didn't come through clearly in the execution, but that was certainly the idea that I was trying to incorporate into the proposed letter.
Mr. Chairman, Just to address that, the Central Delta Water Agency position, which reflects a compilation of the views of the local agencies for years, had recommended, and it's actually been implemented in this way, that the priorities are dealt with by sharing the funding. In other words, from, let's say there's $100 million, 10% of that goes for levee maintenance, and then the remainder gets split between an effort to bring the Delta levee system up as a whole to a minimum standard, and the other pot goes to where the priorities can be pinpointed by somebody. You know, levee risk and where the levees are going to fail, it's kind of like throwing a dart at the wall. Urban levees are built to a much higher standard already, so their opportunity for failure is much less in a pure sense than the other levees. So priorities are being addressed. It's not in this letter in that fashion, but it is in our positions that we've presented to the commission. I mean, there's nothing wrong with incorporating that. I had submitted a letter years ago to Mr. Grindstaff, who eventually became the executive officer of the Stewardship Council, and I submitted it at his request. He said, well, if you wait for DWR to come up with some kind of priority mechanism, you're never going to get it. And I don't know if he knew who he was talking to, but anyway, I made the effort of getting all the engineers together and all the various districts, and we submitted the proposal that divides the money up so that the priorities are recognized by an allocation of the funding rather than just picking, you know, this is the highest, you know, use or whatever. Otherwise, you're going to put all your money in the urban areas, which have people and property that, you know you got to protect those. So we tried to, you know, put that forward. The other thing that's gone on over the years is that urban levees in the Central Valley flood control system are treated and funded separately. So we're talking about the Delta levee program. You put those two programs together, you won't put any money into the non-project area of the Delta. So you have the potential of losing that system, which has severe repercussions that expand on in beyond the boundaries of the Central Delta, for example, and Western Delta, that affect infrastructure. Even the DREAM study said if you let that flood elevation reach a 100-year level, there's $67.1 billion of infrastructure at risk. So we got to be careful what we do here. But yes, we should recognize priorities, and we suggested, and the state actually is doing that now. They're recognizing the priorities with the pots of the funds. So I agree with that. The letter can be improved in that respect. But the idea of leaving out the total area in the other category of the heart of the Delta is a big mistake. So I like the letter, but it can be improved.
So what's the pleasure of the board? Do we want to make some tweaks to it?
Could I do public comment?
Sure, Melinda, come forward.
I had it on my card, so thank you, Central Valley Flood Control Association. And yeah, our request would be what was discussed by Supervisor Natoli, to add a sentence that explicitly supports supporting the legislature extending the current 75-25% state local cost share, and I think that needs to be defined. You know, you state what that is, that 75 for the Delta Subvention Program, by passing legislation before it reverts to 50-50 in July 1st, 2018, and using the example that, you know, the supervisor gave of $1 million levee project. Let's say it's 4 miles. Yeah, there's a big difference in having a $250,000 cost share to suddenly having it double to $500,000 if this is allowed to revert. So that statement of the 75-25 is important, and it's much more fiscally damaging to a local RD compared to the increase in the per mile, because let's say it was a 4-mile levee project, you know, if under currently you pay $1,000 per mile, so it's $4,000. I'm going to round off to $2,500 if you increased it for inflation, but that's $10,000. It's $6,000 more. But okay, it's bad, but compared to the doubling from $250,000 to $500,000, that's where it becomes fiscally challenging for those districts to participate. So we would encourage you to add a sentence on that. Thank you. Oh, one other thing, there was one word in the same section of that discussion of the program, the RRR6, that at the last part of the sentence that maybe should be changed to should. Thanks.
It should versus could.
Okay, any further comments? Chuck?
Yeah, just a couple of questions, just for clarification. I understand the issue in regards to prioritization. I'm not quite sure, because one of the things that some of my constituents have raised is in regards to the fees and how that changes. I mean, will they be paying more? And the other concern is if they are, based upon the language, is as going with the prioritization, do they then, after paying the fees, lose control of that money? Because generally what's done now is through the reclamation districts. And so the concern is that money would be committed to a fund which would then, as alluded to earlier, may go to the state's prioritization. I think the concern would be that the changes that are made as far as the costs to the individual property owners or whoever would not be increased. Subvention obviously is important, but I think it's important to understand the potential of loss of, which is an issue along every governmental body, is autonomy, the ability to control one's destiny, so to speak. So is there a change which would affect the ability of those property owners or the reclamation districts to make determinations in regards to what's best for their particular levies?
Not that I read in Chapter 7 of the Delta Plan, but I do think this goes to the heart of the levy financing feasibility study that I expect the Commission will talk about it at its March meeting. And it's very possible that the Commission might want to, attach its own recommendations to the transmittal of any report, and one recommendation could be that there's no appetite for moving to that type of system of funding, and that we just want to continue down the path that we're on. It's a larger discussion. I'd like to bring it up in the context of the subcommittee meeting, but I think it does. It's just how you view the world, I think, and whether you believe we can continue to enjoy these infusions of funding from statewide general obligation bond measures, or if that's a real uncertain funding source, what will create the certainty for the continued improvements that we need to be making to this system.
Okay. And the other comment is in regards to the term beneficiary pays. There's a lot of discussion about what that actually means. What's your sense of that particular language? Because
Yeah.
it could affect the entire state.
No, I know. And I think it's like that comment the Supreme Court justice made about pornography. And so you kind of know it when you see it. Again, we can go into greater detail when we take up this report, but the universe of beneficiaries is fairly well defined. You can certainly extend it out to very super ancillary beneficiaries that aren't getting much, if any, benefit at all. As you move out in that direction, the cost to collect from them becomes so great that it just becomes pointless to do so. the universe of beneficiaries, the major beneficiaries, are pretty well known, and they've been known for decades. I mean, Commissioner Nomalini directed me to a report that he was involved with going back several decades, and we talk about the same group of beneficiaries in that report as we talked about in this current effort.
So there's no effort to expand that or modify that definition as
well, the group is understood. It's just a question of how you divide the relative benefit amongst those different parties. That's where it really gets interesting.
Okay, and we'll have that discussion.
Well, that's what the feasibility study queues up for the next round of work. I hate even saying that because I always hate hearing about something that recommends more work, but the reality is that that's what this feasibility study does. It doesn't say, you know, we've determined what your share is. It just says that here's the broad group of beneficiaries, and ideally they would talk amongst themselves and come to some agreement on how they're going to share the burden of the improvements that need to continue to be made.
Okay. One last question, just as a general overview. I read the staff report and et cetera. Because one of the concerns I always have with updates or modifications, et cetera, is why are we doing this? You know, what's the impetus to make these changes? So can you just synopsize why we're going through these particular changes now, and what's the overall benefit to those changes to, obviously, the Delta?
Well, I mean, at the risk of speaking for the Stewardship Council, but let me take a stab at it. Dan Ray can jump to the podium and correct me. But the council has a statutory mandate to develop this Levee Investment Strategy. And when the Delta Plan was adopted, I think it's safe to say that there was placeholder language to address this issue as they needed to address it, but that the intention was to go much deeper with a more detailed study and effort. And I think that's what this is. We're just responding to it because the council's in the process of proposing amendments to their Delta Plan. And so, you know, we're providing comment on that and trying to ensure that at every turn that's steered in a direction that recognizes the unique Delta values: agriculture, recreation, culture, and natural resources. So that's our charge as a commission, and what we've tried to do in advising through every step of the process, and what we can now do through a formal comment letter from the commission.
Thank you.
Don? Yeah, maybe to help us, maybe to focus in and certainly not to cut off any discussion in hearing the comments, I guess I would just offer, and again, I can certainly put in a form of motion in a moment, but that in the second paragraph on page 2, that we add a sentence that would state our support for or you know, maintaining or keeping the cost share ratio, the 75-25 split. If current may be understood, but maybe it needs to be, I think it needs to be clear. I did hear a suggestion from Melinda. She left the podium. I think she said that in that last sentence, in fact, the last line under paragraph 2, that step that rather than could be taken, should be taken. So I would, you know, again, I don't have heartburn with that. Others may. I do think, though, as we get down to the system improvements, that paragraph would be paragraph 4. And I understand that staff is trying to reference what's being proposed in the DSC draft documents, and so we can tie that in a way that's understood, and then making our statement. That might be able to be tied up a bit, particularly in that first sentence. You know, talk about what it suggests, high priorities over lower priorities. But where I think the meat of this whole thing is, and again, I appreciate what both Todd and Dante pointed out, but I, at least from my vantage point, I think the citing the statutory mandate, and certainly the outline that came with the economic sustainability plan that this commission had prepared and sent forward to the Stewardship Council. I'm not totally satisfied with the wording there when it says the commission proposes a commitment. In fact, even the previous language would argue for a stronger commitment. And so maybe there's a more artful way of saying that, but I think that again, if it's the will of this commission, that the commission believes or supports, strongly supports a commitment to the system-wide improvement of all Delta levees before any funding. And so I'm okay with those changes, but I just think it needs to be clear. Otherwise, it's kind of fuzzy, and maybe that's intentionally so, recognizing the viewpoints on this commission, and and I think the different thoughts along those lines. But I think that is really a crux of what certainly this section of the Delta plan is going to as it relates to Delta levees, and I think this is key to the interest that this commission is entrusted to reflect and represent, certainly through its deliberations. And so I guess I'm going to suggest, Mr. Chair, that, and again, I'm for one, I'm open to hearing, how we might state that differently, but in a way that I think makes it very clear, just doesn't propose or argue, that says that this is what we believe, that there needs to be a commitment. And then, the DSC can do with it as they please. And certainly you're going to be our representative carrying this forward on the council. But those are my thoughts. And so again, I know in the interest certainly of time this evening and trying to help staff, get the bows on this, I would offer those as my comments.
Yes.
So I just want very briefly. So I concur with much of the commission's comment, all of the commission comments actually. But the only thing that I would ask Eric maybe is, so you indicated earlier that we're allowed to comment, but given the significance of some of the issues that we've identified in the letter, would it be appropriate to then ask for a response to our comments? Because putting them in writing certainly puts them on record to some degree. But to the extent that we actually want to maybe push a bit further and to say that we believe this because of what our charges, as Commissioner Natoli indicated, would it be appropriate to ask for a response to our suggestions? Because otherwise it just sort of dies on the vine, as many comment letters do. Once they're received, everybody sort of fulfills their obligation. The receiving agency receives them, the commenting agent comments, and then they just sort of end there. And so I would suggest that we ask for a response and at least tease out a bit further whether or not our comments push the issues, got closer to maybe a different solution, or fell on deaf ears. It would be helpful to know.
No, I think that would be a good addition.
Ask for a positive response.
Well then let's just offer the suggestion that we want very clearly and say this is the answer that you're looking for.
Right.
There we go. We'll write our own response. There we go.
So what I heard in the discussion from Commissioner Natoli was a motion. Do you want to restate that? I mean, you talked about the 75-25 share.
Right.
You talked about Melinda's could to should, and you, on the commission proposes maybe something like, the commission strongly supports a commitment to statewide improvement of all depth. Would that fit?
Yep,
with
that
your-
would fit with mine. Yeah, again, and I'm certainly willing to hear other views on that, because I heard what Todd was saying in response to some of Dante's comments. But yeah, that would fit with me. I would be fine with that. And then the suggestion Mr. Villegas, or Commissioner Villegas, offered too, that we should ask, certainly out of courtesy for a response.
I would add that perhaps we ought to suggest that the Stewardship Council consider the allocation of funding as the method for priorities, as consistent with past practices.
Is it?
I'm
Not quite
not
sure.
sure I understand that comment. I got all the other comments, but could you elaborate on that a little bit more,
Yeah,
Commissioner Maloney?
in terms of priority, their focus is on designating particular levee systems as either a high priority or very high, and then they have an other category. So they're going to throw the dart and invest, for example, in 5 districts rather than the system. Now, how do you reconcile that desire to give particular help where someone thinks there is a critical need, perhaps to protect that district that has more people in it? Well, if you take and divide the funding up so that part of the funding goes for that objective, part of the funding goes for the system-wide effort, and part of the funding goes for maintenance, then you serve all of those desires, but in a proportionate way to the funding. So you can satisfy all of those things. In fact, those of us who worked on the levee programs years ago made the deal with DWR. It was very simple. It was half of the funding goes Delta-wide for levees, half of the funding goes to DWR for the levees they want to fix, which are those related to water export. And our other proviso, which got lost over the years, was that you don't take the levee funding and use it to develop habitat or tules, growing tules or doing this and that, but concentrate on getting the job done. Now, we lost that fight. Over the years, it got deteriorated to where the state took their share of the money and they were growing peat on Twitchell or whatever, which is fine if you have your levees up to standard, but those ventures. So anyway, just the concept of priority as related to allocation of funding, pots of funding, rather than trying to select individual. I know this doesn't sit well with some of those in the audience, but I think it worked for a number of years, and some of which was mentioned as the success of the programs is due to that. Anyway, I'll second the motion with that addition.
Was that a friendly amendment?
Yeah. I don't know if Natoli wants it. If he doesn't want it, we'll leave
again,
it.
I think it's a good explanation of how you could apportion the funding. Then I think that as you've outlined that, we should be very clear if that's what we intend to do. And I don't know if, Eric, you've got that down. It talks kind of from a perspective of historical versus going as well as going forward. Then as to how that allocation. And I don't know that the Delta plan, I guess I would just say is going to get that specific. I mean, we could talk about maybe a way to sum up what you said, Dante, in a way that references that. You've done some of that here too, just relative to subvention, but maybe to funding for, levee maintenance, improvements, and prioritization. Recognizing that we're in an era where people are looking at juggling this and maybe reformulating. I don't take exception to the fact that if there's, from a historical perspective, and this commission chooses to say that we think that approach was one that has worked fairly well if it's adhered to, and so I don't know how you would state it. I mean, I was trying to keep this fairly simple.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I understand how that works as a concept, but unless you attached specific numbers to it, I think it would be difficult to incorporate it into the letter.
I support the letter without that.
Okay.
If that's what.
I mean, in part, that was the thinking behind, this base level of improvement.
Right.
And then prioritization beyond that, because maybe it's just because I'm lazy and I didn't have to do the hard thinking.
No, I would just say, though, that a commitment to system-wide improvements, again, recognizing what's been said here this evening, maybe different vantage points, to me, that, to the point that, both Dante, but I think others have made consistently, and certainly when I was on the Stewardship Council,
I changed my comment to a second.
Okay.
Okay, now we're getting somewhere. But I think Dante's points are certainly valid, important, and we ought to look at embellishing on those, and maybe that's the subject of another letter to the Stewardship Council. But I think the motion, a second, does everyone understand the motion? Okay? So could I hear a vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you.
Eric, can you give us email us a dated period?
Yes, I can.
Okay, we're commissioner comments. I do have a couple of our commissioners approached me about a earlier start time. And I wanted to see if there's any interest in an earlier start time.
Well, you want me to be later than I already am?
I told my colleagues I'd bring it up.
Particular reason, or?
Well, some folks have an hour trip.
Got it. Okay.
So they're getting home at 10 o'clock or 10:30.
Yeah. Or shorter meeting.
So let me put it this way. Let's think about that. At our next commission meeting, we'll talk about it. You'll have a chance to think about it, whether it fits in with schedules. The public, is an earlier start time inconvenient? Because we're really here for you all. So think about it, and our next meeting, we'll talk in more detail.
So
Okay?
our next meeting's in Rio Vista.
Rio Vista?
I don't have the date in front of me, but would you all like to start that meeting at 5:30 or try a 5 o'clock start time?
To me, it doesn't matter. It's home for me.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
and I should acknowledge Marianne Norris from Senator Galgiani's office with a comment about traffic, which is in part one of the advantages of moving to an earlier start time.
Okay, it'll be 5:30.
Okay,
and-
5:30 then, thank you.
And we'll discuss it if there's a need to. So anyway, thank you all, and Commissioner, thank you. Adjourned.
Good job. Yep.